Chapter 191, A Chance Encounter. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. A number of small buildings were spread over a vast area on a mountain peak. They seemed to be arranged in an irregular pattern, but gave a very picturesque effect. And a gigantic three-layered purple palace stood in the middle of the arrangement. These buildings were connected with the purple palace via flying bridges. They constituted a picture of a terrestrial road. It had an implicit charm. A lady sat cross-legged on a white futon in the hall of the three-layered purple palace. She had a plentiful figure, and was attired in a light green royal robe. Her eyes were closed, they seemed to be smeared with a gentle radiance like water. Another girl sat cross-legged on a similar futon opposite to her. She was clad in a bright green and magnificent-looking robe. It was none other than Zhongxiu. There was a serene look on her face. However, a hint of melancholy could be seen in the depths of her eyes. The layout of the hall was simple and elegant. It gave an impression of bleak emptiness. "Miss Xiu, have you made a firm resolve that you would enter into the Jade Waves Pond in order to achieve eternity by ending the cycle of life and death?" The voice of the woman dressed in light green clothing reverberated in the hall. "Yes, Master." Zhongxiu nodded. "You know that your master has always allowed nature to take its course. You're my most promising candidate. But, I don't wish to force the regret of my past upon you, and allow you to replace me. After all, there's no way to return once you've set out in pursuit of this road," the royal beautiful maiden dressed in light green clothing said. "Respected master, I've made up my mind," Zhongxiu raised her head and said in a resolute tone. "If that's the case, then you can go. Given your natural endowments, you can succeed in this if you stay in the Jade Waves Pond for 1 year," the beautiful lady opened her eyes and said. There was a rural market in the vicinity of the purple Lingshan Mountains. Shi Mu walked out of a shop. His face was sparkling with gladness. There was a small cloth-wrapped packet in his hand. It seemed to contain 7 or 8 medicine bottles. This market belonged to the Wonderful Sound sect. Shi Mu descended from the mountain, and started to stroll around the marketplace. Suddenly, he realized that the bone-tempering pill and the blood-strengthening pill were also sold in the market. Moreover, the quality of these pills was far better than the pills that were sold by the Black Demon sect. So, he exchanged almost all of his belongings for the bone-tempering and the blood-strengthening pills. These pills were sufficient to support his practice for at least 1 year. Now, the time had finally arrived for Shi Mu to depart from the marketplace. Shi Mu stood firm, and pulled out a map from his clothes. The entire area of the human race was clearly marked on this map. The topography of various regions of the cities were also vividly portrayed on the map. Shi Mu started to examine the map carefully. He was looking for an itinerary to return to the Black Demon sect from the Wonderful Sound sect. Suddenly, his eyes fell on a mountain range that stood between the 2 mountains. "Wanlong Mountains," he murmured. Then, an image of a beautiful silhouette floated into his mind. He remained glued to his spot for a moment. After that, he walked towards the exit of the marketplace. After 1 month, Shi Mu arrived in the vicinity of a huge mountain peak on another horse-drawn carriage. It seemed from afar as if the curtain of white clouds were wound around the mountain peak. Countless palaces and buildings could be seen in the vicinity. They seemed to be scattered everywhere, and were shrouded in a vast layer of mist. They bore an ambience of an unworldly wonderland. This was the famous and illustrious Wanlong Mountain. It stood upright on the eastern peninsula of the mainland. It was the entrance to one of the 3 big sects of the Dachi kingdom, the Tianyin sect. Shi Mu gazed towards the buildings on the hilltop. Then, he took out a small white jade box from his bosom. The texture of this jade box looked exquisite. An ice crystal-like pattern was carved on its surface. It was faintly emitting a wisp of cold air like a cube of ice. This jade box was made up of a high-quality ice jade. A fist-sized green fruit came into view as Shi Mu opened its lid. It was the green frost fruit. Shi Mu closed the box. Then, his gaze fell on the summit of the mountain. there was a hint of hesitation in his eyes. Shi Mu had bumped into the demon witch of the Tianyin twice. But, his observant eyes hadn't failed to notice that she specialized in the ice attribute cultivation arts. Therefore, this green frost fruit was best suited to her. Shi Mu wanted to deliver this fruit to her in person. But, he couldn't ignore the promise that he had made to her earlier. He could meet her only after he had stepped into the Xian realm. Therefore, his climbing the mountain would be equal to breaking the promise that he had made to her. Suddenly, a sound of footsteps was heard from the front. It sounded as if a number of people were approaching in his direction. Shi Mu hastily kept the jade box. Then, 7 or 8 people walked over from the nearby mountain pass. They seemed to be the disciples of the Tianyin sect. Who are you? Why are you wandering in the vicinity of our sect? The disciples looked surprised on seeing Shi Mu. Then, a white-robed girl shouted while resting her hands on her waist. She seemed to be the leader of this group. Shi Mu started to explain. But then, he was left startled. The white-robed girl was also dumbfounded. She carefully looked into Shi Mu's eyes. Your brother Shi Mu, the white-robed girl spoke in a surprised tone. Sister Qi, long time no see. Shi Mu jumped down from the carriage, and greeted with a smile. This woman was none other than Qi Xian of the Tianyin sect. She was the same girl who was with Shi Mu in the stronghold during the barbarians' invasion. They hadn't seen each other since several years. Qi Xian's cultivation had made a remarkable progress during this period. Now, she had stepped into the advanced stage of the Houtian realm. Suddenly, a thought dawned upon Shi Mu's mind. He remembered that an extremely unusual relationship existed between Qi Xian and the demon witch of Tianyin. What has brought Brother Shi to the Tianyin sect? Qi Xian waved her hand, and signaled other disciples to leave them alone and wait in the distance. I was just passing through this place. I happened to have some personal matter to take care of, Shi Mu said. Brother Shi, you're now considered to be an outstanding disciple of the Black Demon sect. I've heard that you joined the ambassador group that was dispatched by the Union to the barbarians' wasteland in order to form a peace agreement with them. You also made an incredible contribution for this peace agreement. This news has already spread in the Union, Qi Xian said in an inquisitive manner. Shi Mu was a little surprised to hear these words. But then, he recalled that Huo Wu wasn't only the princess of the Deqi kingdom, but was also a disciple of the Tianyin sect. So, he felt a little relieved in his heart. I happened to travel with Princess Huo Wu. It was merely a chance encounter, Shi Mu replied with a soft chuckle. They continued to talk for some more time. Qi Xian's talks mostly revolved around Shi Mu's experiences in the barbarians' wasteland. She seemed to be quite interested in this matter. We're talking here like strangers. Brother Shi, it would be better for you to follow me to the sect's welcome peak, since you've come here with a thing on your mind. If there's any matter that I can help you with, then feel free to ask, Qi Xian said. It's no big deal. Moreover, we can't keep talking endlessly. Oh, by the way, perhaps Sister Qi can help me with one matter, Shi Mu said in a hesitant manner. Brother Shi, please feel free to ask anything. Qi Xian was little surprised. Then, she said. May I ask, is your elder the demon witch of Tianyin still in the sect? Shi Mu asked after a momentary hesitation. Young lady Tianyin? She's in the sect. But, she's currently occupied with her closed-door practice. So, Brother Shi is looking for young lady Tianyin, isn't he? Qi Xian's eyes flashed as if she had realized something. She then asked in a mischievous tone. Cough. Actually, I want to give her something. But, it seems very inconvenient to climb up the mountain. So, may I request Sister Qi to do this on my behalf? Shi Mu's complexion turned slightly red as he replied. Come on, Qi Xian's face revealed a ridiculing expression. She put out her hand with a faint smile on her face. Here it is. Shi Mu's face grew hot as he took out the jade box from his clothes. Qi Xian chuckled twice as she reached out to receive the box. Brother Shi, you rest assured. Leave this matter to me. I'll definitely deliver this thing to the young lady Tianyin on your behalf, Qi Xian said. Thank you so much, Sister Qi. Shi Mu felt relieved. He then clasped his hands across his chest to express his gratitude. Both of them continued to chat casually for some more time. After that, Qi Xian left the place along with the other disciples of her sect. Shi Mu gazed at the receding figures of Qi Xian and others for a moment. After that, he shifted his gaze towards the buildings on the hilltop. He remained motionless for a while. I'll be back soon, a hint of firmness flashed through his eyes as he muttered to himself. Then, he flicked the reins in order to change the direction of the carriage, and drifted away towards a distant place. The carriage disappeared into the distance in a fleeting moment. There was an extremely high mountain peak on the Wanlong Mountains. It looked beautiful and secluded. A thin layer of clouds was floating in the vicinity of this peak like a cotton wad. The mountain peak seemed as if it was shrouded in a white veil. A lofty building was situated on the top of the mountain peak. It was an elegantly styled building. It seemed to be a woman's residence. This place was the residence of the demon witch of Tianyin Lang Huanfeng. Qi Xian and a fairy-like maiden sat opposite to each other in a hall of one of the attics. Shi Mu would have been bubbling over with excitement if he was there. This maiden was none other than the dream of his life, the person he yearned for day and night. She was the demon witch of Tianyin. The demon witch of Tianyin looked much younger than how she looked in the woods a few years ago. In fact, she looked like a teenage girl. A table lay between the two women. A small white jade box was placed on the table. It was exuding a wisp of cold air. Shi Mu. The demon witch of Tianyin looked astounded as she said. It was him. I met this guy a few hours back in the mountains. He asked me to deliver this thing to you, Qi Xian said while nodding her head. The demon witch of Tianyin creased her eyebrows as a trace of unbelievable look flashed across her eyes. She didn't speak anything for a while. She then picked up the jade box, and opened its lid. A whiz of faint fragrance mixed with a wisp of coldness was diffused into the air. After that, the green frost fruit came into the view. This is, the green frost fruit. The demon witch's face revealed an astonished look. She blurted out hastily. Qi Xian wrinkled her eyebrows, and her face revealed a puzzled look. It seemed that she hadn't heard these words before. But, the sniff of this exquisite aroma had felt extremely refreshing to her, as if it had penetrated deeply into her heart. The demon witch also looked slightly excited. Therefore, Qi Xian could guess that this ordinary-looking fruit must be some kind of a yin attribute priceless thing. A ray of light flashed across Qi Xian's eyes, and disappeared. That Shi Mu, where's he now? The demon witch looked at the fruit a few times. She then asked after a momentary hesitation. He departed right after giving me this jade box. He said that it was too inconvenient for him to climb up the mountain, Qi Xian replied truthfully. The demon witch looked a little surprised. But, she immediately resumed her calm state, and closed the jade box. The green ring on her finger shot a beam of green light as she moved her hand. Then, the jade box vanished into thin air. It was hard to say where it had gone. Qi Xian's eyes lit up brightly. She looked at the green ring in the demon witch's finger in an envious manner. The green ring was an extremely rare space attribute magic tool. It was used to store things for convenience. In fact, it eliminated the trouble of carrying heavy things. The number of space attribute magic tools was extremely less across the 7 big sects. Only a handful of Xian level people possessed such tools. There's no need to leak the matter pertaining to Shi Mu outside the room, the demon witch said. Yes. Qi Xian was curious to know the reason behind the secrecy. But, she complied in front of the demon witch. Qi Xian didn't have any reason to stay in the room any longer. Therefore, she bid her goodbye and left. The demon witch walked to the window. Her beautiful eyes flashed as she looked towards the floating mist in front of her eyes. Then, a trace of smile glittered across her face. After that, she turned around and walked away from the window. Chapter 192, Search. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. A large number of palaces were located somewhere in the bottom of the East China Sea. These palaces were fully embedded with various kinds of corals and crystals. They extended to a vast area in the dark seabed. Bursts of gorgeous and dazzling lights could be seen inside them. The dazzling lights and vibrant colors made this area a beautiful landscape to behold. A clamorous sound was heard somewhere in a huge and magnificent palace, as if an intense dispute was going on. An old man was seated on the seat of honor. There was a dignified expression on his face. He was attired in magnificent clothing. He had a pair of golden horns on his head. A shining light flickered in the old man's eyes whenever he opened and closed them. There wasn't the slightest trace of an imposing aura around his body, it seemed to have been completely concealed. He wasn't even emitting a wisp of his majestic qi. He was listening to the arguments of the people seated below him with an expressionless face. He hadn't uttered a single word this entire time. The clamoring crowd seemed to be divided into two sides. The faint air of a confrontation could be sensed between them. The group on the left-hand side was being led by a blue-robed beautiful woman who wore a gaudy royal dress. The other party was headed by an old man with droopy eyebrows. He carried a turtle shell on his back. The clam girl Xiang Zhu stood beside the beautiful lady with her head lowered. It seemed as if she was looking at the tip of her toe. She seemed to be immersed in a deep contemplation. It was hard to say what she was thinking about. How did the human and the barbarian races form an alliance? The human race has captured and killed so many people of our race in the past. Their brutality has terribly increased in these past few years, they're very arrogant. We must make them pay for their sins by shedding their blood, a tall and robust man beside the turtle-shelled old man said with a furious expression on his face. We've received the feedback from the patrolling sea team. According to them, both the human and barbarian races have already dispatched most of their elite forces at various places. They've also dispatched heavy forces to every coastal town for an all-round defense. I'm afraid that we'll suffer a heavy loss if we launch our attack recklessly, a green-faced sea-dweller woman retorted from the side of the royal-dressed lady. The complexion of the sea-dweller sank, his body was covered with a layer of scales. He was about to say something. But, the voice of the royal-dressed lady resounded, this humble woman believes that the saintess has obtained the ancient secret technique of the barbarian race, and, we can immediately put it into practice. Why would we worry about the destruction of the human race once we become successful? According to what this old minister sees, the ancient barbarian people were proficient in controlling souls. But, this technique demands a huge consumption of energy and time. It doesn't matter if you succeed. But what if you fail? The turtle-shelled old man narrowed his eyes and said in a tone that seemed to carry a hidden meaning inside it. So, the senior minister wants to say that this humble woman should undertake this responsibility? You must know that this matter involves the revitalization of our East China Sea, which is a matter of paramount importance. Moreover, the chances of failure can even be said as an extremely rare thing this time. Things may change very drastically if we delay this matter. Would the senior minister willing to shoulder the responsibility if that happens? The royal-dressed lady said in a cold tone. Madam has spoken discreetly. This old minister couldn't grasp the meaning behind these words, the turtle-shelled middle-aged man said while shaking his head. Both the sides became engaged in a fierce argument. Suddenly, a low and dignified voice burst out from the direction of the seat of honor. Well, both of you don't have to wrangle about this matter. The plan of invasion on the human race has been pulled ahead of its time. Each division is ordered to pull back their armed forces and maintain the battlefront. Madam Lan, you take care of the saintess, and help her comprehend the witch spell as quickly as possible. Senior Minister Wu, you begin to arrange the materials that would be needed for this spell, the old man with the pair of golden horns on his head said. After that, he stood up and strode towards the door without waiting for anyone to respond. Then, he disappeared from the sight. Shi Mu left the Wanlong Mountains the next afternoon. The mist spurted all over the mountain, and the entire foot of the mountain seemed to have become a sea of clouds. Moreover, multiple layers of clouds had veiled the entire sky. In fact, it seemed as if they were surging over in an unceasing manner. The world looked pellucid and vast between the two layers of the sea of clouds. There was a gigantic green peak. But, it was hard to see its head or tail. It gave off an ambience of a tall ladder that connected both the seas of clouds, as if a mighty tower had joined the heaven and the earth. There was a luxuriant forest at the summit of the mountain. There was a large limpid lake at the center of the forest. It extended several hundred miles into the forest. The color of the lake water was as deep green as a piece of jade. But, the thing that looked the most delightful to the eye was an antique octagonal pavilion that stood at the center of the lake. 9 long and winding corridors meandered from the shore as connecting routes. A young girl stood while holding the pavilion's handrail. She was exceptionally gorgeous. She looked as if a fairy had descended from the heaven. She wore a snow-white dress. Her bare feet looked like a pair of jade. She was gazing into the distance towards the green lake. Her eyes looked like a wisp of smoke. A woman with plentiful stature stood near her. She was clad in a golden robe. Her disposition was exceptionally charming. A pair of lustrous eyes gazed at the fairy-like maiden, and a gleam of infatuated look trailed across her eyes. "What's the matter? Why did you ask me to come here at this time?" The fairy-like maiden's eyes gradually regained their calmness. She then said in a light tone, "Dear Xuet, you've decided, haven't you?" The eyes of the golden-robed woman looked clear, and her facial expression was solemn. "Right." The fairy-like maiden remained silent for a moment. She then replied, "Do you really wish to become stronger? What would you do if you were successful and became invincible?" The golden-robed woman's complexion darkened as she said, "This opportunity knocks only once in 30 years. My master is regretting for not getting selected back then. I want to carry out her cherished desire," the fairy-like maiden replied in a resolute tone. "Could it be that you and your master wish to obtain the benefits of the sect?" "Humph! Then, how is this different from betraying people?" The elegant eyebrows of the golden-robed woman twitched as she said, there was a contemptuous look on her face. "Don't talk rubbish. This matter is good for me as well as the sect. You don't have to worry about it." The fairy-like maiden's delicate brows creased as she reprimanded her in an unpleasant tone. "Huo Wu can't be considered lesser than you. But, why doesn't she want to go?" The golden-robed woman remained silent for a while. She then said, "Huo Wu can't break the wall of the Xian Tian realm in such a short period of time. Moreover, the current monarch of the Dachi kingdom doesn't have a child. Therefore, Huo Wu would have to inherit the throne in the future." The fairy-like maiden shook her head, and replied with a sigh. "That Shi Mu, you don't care about him as well? This kid's potential has far surpassed the expectations of all the elders. He seems to conform to your standards very well. Won't you consider it?" The golden-robed woman moved her eyes and asked. I don't have any relationship with him." The fairy-like maiden was left stunned for a moment. Then, her eyes flickered as she replied. "He really doesn't matter to you? Isn't there an agreement between the two of you?" A hint of a crafty smile flashed across the golden-robed woman's eyes as she said. The fairy-like maiden was rendered silent for a moment. Suddenly, a white shadow flashed, and moved a few feet away. Then, it flickered a few times before it vanished into thin air. "My decision won't change," the fairy-like maiden's voice resounded from afar. The golden-robed woman gazed at the receding white silhouette, and clenched her fists. Her elegant eyes flickered, it seemed as if she was thinking something. In the dead spirit world, a sky-soaring mountain peak stood erect on the ground. The surface of the surrounding peaks was pitch black in color. There was a cold and gloomy aura around them. The ground beneath the mountain was a piece of land covered with barren sand. Its gravel was also black in color. A gust of wind was howling between the mountain peaks in a continuous manner. The wind seemed to have a black string-like feel to it. It was the cold yin qi. But, what looked most awe-inspiring was the sight that numerous skeletons were scattered all over the sand. Skulls, bone arms, human skeletons, beast skeletons and various other kinds of bones could be seen lying on the ground. Some of the skeletons were half buried in the sand. It seemed that this place had experienced countless wars. Numerous bodies of dead spirit creatures could be seen lying everywhere. A group of the human skeletons lined up in a long queue were advancing forward against the howling cold wind. Yan Luo was leading that group of the skeletons. The soul flames in its eyes flickered, and revealed a faint trace of impatience. It advanced forward with huge strides. The mighty force of the wind was obstructing the skeletons from moving ahead. But, Yan Luo wasn't paying any attention to it. There was a group of human skeletons behind it. All of them were striving hard to take a step forward. They were barely able to keep pace with Yan Luo. They continued to enter into the depths of the Black Mountain peak. But, the might of the wind also continued to grow stronger, so much so that it began to roll up the sand and dust from the ground. It gradually took the form of a black sandstorm, and started to blow against the faces of the skeletons. The sandstorm didn't cause any harm to Yan Luo. However, a few small and feeble skeletons behind it rolled up by the mighty force of the wind, and were thrown into the air. Then, they fell down and shattered into pieces. Their soul flames gradually dissipated. Yan Luo seemed to be unaware of the situation behind it. It continued to move forward at the same pace. Yan Luo arrived at a canyon in the middle of two gigantic peaks after an unknown period of time. Then, its footsteps finally stopped. A burst of intermittent footsteps caught up with it after some time. Over 100 human skeletons had started to walk after Yan Luo. But now, only 30 or 40 skeletons could be seen behind it. All of them seemed to be the strongest skeletons in the group. The blue soul flames in Yan Luo's eyes flickered. It seemed as if it had induced something. Suddenly, its body trembled, and it ran ahead. It reached a low-lying ground within a couple of breaths' time. This place was a few hundred feet away from the place it had previously stood at. Roar! Yan Luo stretched open its mouth, and issued an invisible brainwave. The group of human skeletons immediately dashed over, and started to dig up the ground with their hands. Even Yan Luo began to scoop the black sand out of the ground. A large number of bones began to emerge from inside the sand. They seemed to have been decaying under the sand for an unknown number of years. The dozens of skeletons dug out a several feet deep hole in an instant. But, the texture of the soil grew harder as they progressed deeper. It became very difficult for ordinary skeleton soldiers to dig the ground any further. Only Yan Luo's palms were still as sharp as before. It was piercing its hands into the ground as if it was piercing a tofu. Yan Luo's soul flames started to flicker as the movement of its hands grew faster. Then, they started to become brighter. Yan Luo pushed a piece of black sand aside with a muffled sound. Then, an ash-grey skeleton appeared before its eyes. The ash-grey skeleton hadn't decayed a bit even though it was deeply buried into the ground. In fact, it was emitting a faint luminescence. The soul flames in Yan Luo's eyes brightened up. It started to dig up the surrounding soil with an increased pace. More of the grey skeleton's body soon came into the view. It turned out to be a piece of bone that was connected with the toe of the leg. It seemed to be its right foot. Yan Luo's body quivered as it held the piece of the leg bone. It seemed as if it was fired up. It then stood up while holding the leg bone in its hand. It then grabbed its bone spear, and hacked it at the right leg with a lightning speed. The right leg was broken into pieces. Yan Luo placed the segment of the leg bone close to its body. Then, the piece of grey leg bone got connected to its body with a flash of white light. After that, a layer of white light emerged on the surface of Yan Luo's body. Then, it enveloped its entire body. The white light receded after a few minutes, and transformed into a group of white light balls. Then, they got integrated into its head. A silent wave of explosion burst out. A burst of formidable brainwaves gushed out from Yan Luo's head, and proliferated towards the surrounding area. After that, the color of soul flames in Yan Luo's eyes changed from light blue to blue. Then, Yan Luo emitted a formidable aura. It was way stronger than its previous aura. The surrounding skeletons knelt down on the ground as they felt that Yan Luo's strength had increased tremendously. The soul flames in Yan Luo's eyes slowly stabilized. But, the radiance in its eyes seemed much brighter and sharper than before. Yan Luo turned around, and looked towards the surrounding skeletons. Then, the surrounding skeletons stood up as it issued an invisible brainwave. After that, Yan Luo waved its hands. A beam of white light fled from its hands, and submerged into the body of all the surrounding skeletons. The skeletons' bodies quivered, and the soul flames in their eyes became more exuberant than before. Yan Luo retrieved its hand. Then, it waved its bone spear, and signaled the skeletons to move forward. Chapter 193, Dancing Around the Flame. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The reflection of moonlight on the surface of the water made everything underneath it look radiant white in color. A carriage was parked in the vicinity of a small brook. A bonfire was ignited beside the brook. A young man sat cross-legged in front of the bonfire. He held his hands in a strange pose. The blazing flame flickered and illuminated the resolute facial features of the young man. The young man was none other than Shi Mu. The silver rays of moonlight were converging and integrating into Shi Mu's body. Shi Mu's body quivered after a while. He then opened his eyes, his face revealed a hint of gladness. He was on his way to the Black Demon sect. He would forge ahead with his journey during the daytime, and would devote his nights to the practice of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. However, he practiced the moon-swallowing art on the moonlit nights. Shi Mu hadn't wasted even a moment during the entire journey. However, he couldn't figure out the strange thing that had happened to him during his last incarnation into the white ape in the restricted area. Now, he could absorb the silver luster of the moonlight while practicing the moon-swallowing art with a faster speed than before. He had left from the Holy Snow Palace a few months back. He had since condensed a broad bean-sized crystal grain in his mind. He felt soothed by the wisp of cold energy emitted by the crystal grain. Shi Mu had also reached the fourth stage of the art of accumulating spirit power. He now intended to continue to absorb the essence of the moonlight for some more time. After that, he would attempt to break through the bottleneck of the fifth layer of this art. But, this wasn't the right time to execute that. Shi Mu stopped practicing the moon-swallowing art. He then took out a bone-tempering pill and a blood-strengthening pill from his clothes. After that, he started to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants in order to refine the efficacy of these pills. Shi Mu had reached the bottleneck of the 10th stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. Now, his breakthrough seemed to be close at hand since he had the pills to support his practice. A little time passed. The trace of a whitish color had suffused the horizon of the morning sky. Shi Mu opened his eyes, and sprang up to go. The flow of real qi within his body was similar to water droplets that had nearly overflowed their container. Suddenly, a wave of valiant forces burst forth from his body. He felt a tingling sensation in his bones. It became difficult for him to bear with this feeling of uneasiness. He wanted to shout out in agony. He issued a loud shout. His meteoric hammer lay on one side. He grabbed it, and brandished it towards the river bank. The huge meteoric hammer started to dance around his body in a violent manner like a black dragon. The hammer seemed like a turbulent storm as it burst out and swept across 100 feet in range. The gust of howling wind started to roll up the dust from the ground. The incredible might of wind also stirred up the river water, and set off several waves. A loud rumbling sound was heard. The meteoric hammer struck a piece of a boulder by the river back, and smashed it. The boulder was as big as a millstone. Suddenly, Shi Mu stopped moving. He seemed to be bored of his solo and monotonous practice. Suddenly, the figure of Yan Luo flashed across his mind. His eyes brightened, and he began to read a magic spell aloud. A cloud of black smoke emerged out of thin air after a while. A skeleton silhouette flashed amid it. Then, Yan Luo's stature appeared into the sight. "Yan Luo, accompany me in practicing the martial arts," Shi Mu commanded Yan Luo. Then, he waved his arm, and the meteoric hammer flung towards Yan Luo's chest, as if a black dragon had darted out of its den. The hammer swept towards Yan Luo, and it carried a strong gust of wind along with it. Right! Suddenly, an indistinct thought popped up in Shi Mu's mind. His complexion changed. He pulled back the meteoric hammer in order to stop its pace. The hammer's head stopped a foot away from Yan Luo's body. "You can speak now." He looked at the skeleton in front of him in astonishment. Shi Mu's eyes flashed as he noticed that the color of Yan Luo's soul flames looked different. They had turned into sky blue in color. Moreover, they bore a ray of light that looked relatively quick-witted than before. "Yes," Yan Luo's indistinct voice was heard. Then, its soul flames flickered as it shot a glance towards the beast soul bag that hung around Shi Mu's waist. "There's no beast soul inside it," Shi Mu said with a wry smile. Yan Luo's soul flames turned a bit gloomy. It seemed as if it had become disappointed. As expected. Shi Mu muttered to himself secretly. Yan Luo had never exhibited such a quick response in the past. It seemed as if its intelligence had evolved along with its strength. However, this discovery didn't come as a surprise to Shi Mu since he had already expected this. Shi Mu didn't look at Yan Luo's intelligence and quick response as a misdemeanor. Shi Mu shrugged off all these thoughts from his mind. He then flicked his arm. Then, the meteoric hammer galloped forward towards Yan Luo like a dragon. Shi Mu hadn't yet practiced any martial art that could improvise the efficacy of his hammer. But, he gradually started to try and explore a few techniques to use his hammer in a more efficient manner. The hammer fluttered, and spun all around in an erratic manner. It seemed as if it was drifting from place to place. Yan Luo's stature flashed, and shifted to one side. It moved 10 feet away in a flash, and avoided the hammer's attack. Shi Mu's face revealed a trace of a smile. He then flicked his arm, and the hammer transformed into several shadows. The shadows swept towards Yan Luo from different directions. The hammer shadows arrived in front of Yan Luo before it could steady itself. Shi Mu had expected Yan Luo to dodge this blow as well. The soul flames in Yan Luo's eyes flashed, and the bone spear in its hand transformed into several white spear shadows. These shadows rushed from several directions to launch a converging attack. Bang! 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 A series of loud metal clanging sounds rang out in the air. Shi Mu's hammer was extremely heavy. Yan Luo's bone spear was almost 10 times lighter than this meteoric hammer. Therefore, the spear's formation was crushed into several small pieces. However, his spear struck a few hammer shadows that had raided from different directions. A few hammer shadows shook as a result of this, and dispersed. In the meantime, Yan Luo's stature flashed, and dodged a few hammer shadows by a hair's breadth. Then, it flew to escape the remaining hammer shadows. Shi Mu's eyebrows snapped into a frown. He had unleashed 2 powerful attacks back to back. They were quite simple, but Shi Mu had poured out the entirety of his strength in those attacks. Surprisingly, Yan Luo had evaded both of his attacks in a very convenient fashion. Shi Mu's complexion sank. The real qi within his body started to bubble up. The violent dance of his hammer almost ascended to its extreme peak. Then, a number of hammer shadows emerged in the air in a criss-cross pattern. After that, an increased number of hammer shadows were shot. Almost a dozen or more black shadows floated in the air, and stormed towards Yan Luo like a howling wind. They carried an overwhelming momentum and a majestic imposing aura that seemed to have the ability to even set off an avalanche. Suddenly, something strange happened. It left Shi Mu dumbstruck. All of Shi Mu's attacks had been dodged by Yan Luo, no matter how violent and ferocious they were. Intermittent bursts of wind were set off by the hammer. This left the trees in the vicinity shaking for a while. Various kinds of dead and colorful leaves fell to the ground like drizzle. The sky was filled with swirling leaves and hammer shadows. Yan Luo shuttled back and forth in the sky amidst them to evade the never-ending attacks. Its silhouette continued to move in a nimble manner. Yan Luo would bow its head, and bend its waist. It would occasionally stretch the crook of its elbow. Each and every of his movements seemed agile and graceful. It seemed as if the wind was blowing and brushing against a willow tree. The flame of the bonfire hadn't extinguished as yet. The white bones of Yan Luo's body were shining like gems against the background of the blazing flames. It could be stated that Yan Luo was dancing instead of dodging the attacks. This scene seemed similar to that of a man flying amid the wind, or a swimming dragon that had been painted by a scholar. The forest, the river bank, the blazing bonfire, the swirling dead leaves, a man with a dancing hammer, and a scuttling skeleton, this sketched out a strange yet a conspicuous and spectacular scene to behold. Clang! A dull thumping sound was heard. Yan Luo pounded its bone spear on the hammer's iron chain. It forced the hammer's head to turn towards another side. The hammer slightly deviated from its original path, and brushed past Yan Luo's body. Shi Mu's vision flashed, and he pounced forward. He pulled the black blade out of its sheath at the same time. 13 black blade light swept towards Yan Luo with a flash. The bone spear in Yan Luo's hand trembled, and a white light appeared. It darted forward while streaking across an arc in the air, and stabbed the 13 blade lights. A loud metal clanging sound was heard. The 13 blade lights were rooted and dispersed in an instant. Moreover, a wisp of massive force travelled through the black blade, and rushed towards Shi Mu. Shi Mu drew a step backwards in a reluctant manner. Yan Luo's body flew 10 feet backwards like a cotton wad drifting in the gentle wind. Then, its feet gracefully landed on the ground. Shi Mu's complexion changed a few times. He then dropped the plan to launch any more attacks on Yan Luo. Yan Luo's offensive and defensive moves had vividly demonstrated that its strength had far surpassed Shi Mu's present strength. This practice match was enough to judge that Yan Luo hadn't even displayed half of its strength. In fact, Shi Mu might fail to defeat Yan Luo even if he activated the strength of his totem. Haha! Suddenly, Shi Mu burst into a loud laughter. Yan Luo tilted its head, and gazed at Shi Mu. It seemed as if it had some doubts. Shi Mu's heart brimmed with excitement as he realized that Yan Luo's strength had even surpassed his own. The more formidable Yan Luo was, the more advantageous it would be for Shi Mu. Such a formidable Xian-Tian master as Shi Mu's training partner would greatly benefit him in his martial arts promotion. Shi Mu turned his head and looked around. The sky had regained its apparent white luster by now. Shi Mu was currently at the common border of the Duchy and the Yan Kingdom. This place was in a wilderness, but it wasn't desolate and uninhabited. Shi Mu waved his hand, and sent Yan Luo back to its strange world. Then, he packed up his luggage to depart. Shi Mu waited until the sky was smeared with clear brightness. After that, he drove the cart and forged ahead in the direction of the Black Demon sect. 6 months later, the bright moon sprinkled its soft and soothing luster across the earth. There were bushes alongside the main road. A horse-drawn carriage was parked therein. A pair of yellow horses stood beside the carriage. They occasionally swung their tails from side to side. They were leisurely gnawing at green grasses in the moonlit night. Shi Mu sat cross-legged in the open land nearby his carriage. The moonlight crystal grain in his mind had eventually grown to a bigger size after 6 months of unceasing and painstaking practice. It was now almost the size of a soapberry. Shi Mu glanced at the full moon in the sky. He then closed his eyes, and slipped into his dreamland. The white ape stood on a silver boulder, its hands were held up, and it exhibited the pose of the moon-swallowing art. The milky white creamy whirlpool in its mind was unceasingly gobbling up the stream of moonlight essence that was seeping into its body. The thing that seemed a little strange to Shi Mu was the duration of the practice. It was unusually longer this time, so much so that Shi Mu was almost bored to tears. Therefore, he forced himself to calm his mind, and pleased his eyes with the mesmerizing scenery of the mountain. An indefinite period of time passed, and Shi Mu suddenly felt that something wasn't right. He was left surprised as he perceived something. The crystal grain in the white ape's mind had grown to a considerably bigger size. It was almost as big as a duck's egg. Shi Mu had a premonition that something bad was about to happen. Then, he realized something. He noticed that the moonlight essence was streaming into the milky white liquid whirlpool in a continuous manner. However, this didn't cause any change in the size of the crystal grain. In fact, the liquid whirlpool continued to grow denser and murkier. A streak of white light appeared in the center of the pool as the radiance of creamy whirlpool grew brighter. After that, the light beam fled from the top of the head of the white ape. It was dozens of feet high. Then, the big crystal grain slowly rose from the white light beam. It passed through the acupuncture point that was at top of the head of the white ape, and stayed at the peak of the light beam. Then, the crystal grain started to rotate with a fast speed. It was exuding a misty white beam of light in the air. Soon, a large number of white luminous balls permeated the sky, as if a tide of crystal grains had surged up in the air. The white radiance of the crystal grain became even brighter with the passage of time. Moreover, its vigor and imposing aura seemed more awe-inspiring. There wasn't the slightest sign of instability in it. Suddenly, the white ape raised its head, and issued a loud roar. Then, the sky turned dark. Shi Mu opened his eyes the next moment. The first thought that crossed Shi Mu's mind was that it seemed to be an incomplete dream. He creased his eyebrows, and carefully recalled his dream. He then vaguely realized something. Shi Mu then closed his eyes once again, and entered the dreamland. He woke up after half an hour. His heart was throbbing a little. He then shook his head. Shi Mu repeated this process several times. A strange ray of light flashed across his eyes as he woke up from his dream the 11th time. It seemed as if he had grabbed the essence of the story. He then slipped into the dreamland once again. He finally saw everything clearly. Everything that had happened when the sky had turned gloomy in his dream. The majority of the radiance of the moonlight had been absorbed by the white ape right after it had roared. Chapter 194, Letting a Great Opportunity Slip By. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The moon turned gloomy since its silver radiance had been swallowed up by the white ape. Only a vague outline was left around it. It seemed as if it had been eclipsed. But then, it began to regain its radiance at an astonishing speed. In fact, it was hard to see it even with the naked eye. The silver luster of moonlight rushed forth like a surging tide, and submerged into the white ape's head. This triggered the rotation of the white and dense whirlpool. It began to rotate at a lightning speed. Then, the duck egg-sized crystal grain at the acupuncture point began to release numerous waves of light beams. Those light beams gathered together, and took the form of a shining and round full moon. A circle of light emerged behind the white ape's head at the same time. It looked like a misty moon. It was similar to a halo of light around the god's head. The white ape drummed its hands, and shouted loudly. Then, it dashed towards a huge tree that stood next to the mountain. It gently jumped onto the tree top, and ran for a couple of steps. After that, it stomped its feet, and sprang to another tree top. It seemed extremely quick and agile. Its shadow continued to shuttle back and forth on the trees in the dark. It leapt and jumped from tree to tree in a continuous manner. Shi Mu finally experienced the overwhelming excitement of the white ape. But, Shi Mu had a premonition amid this excitement. The white ape should be practicing the moon-swallowing art to the consummate stage. Shi Mu felt as if a spell of dizziness had been cast upon him as he saw the white ape jump from one tree to another. After that, his eyes opened since he woke up from his dream. Then, he discovered something queer. The crystal grain in its mind that was almost as big as a soapberry fruit had grown almost a full circle bigger than its original size. Moreover, the magic power that he had stored within his body had got completely used up. Only a wisp of slightly dense real qi remained flowing within his body. Shi Mu brimmed with happiness. His past experiences told him that it had taken him only a few days to increase its size. Suddenly, a thought dawned upon him. He suppressed the excitement and emotions that blazed in his heart. After that, he closed his eyes, and started to practice the art of accumulating spirit power. His chest began to rise and fall with his breathing. Then, the familiar scene appeared before his eyes. A tiny wisp of his magic power flowed and touched the crystal grain in his mind. Boom! The crystal grain got ruptured. However, it didn't take the shape of a white crescent moon as earlier. On the contrary, it turned into a white full moon. In fact, it was as round as a disc. However, Shi Mu couldn't comprehend the faint circle of light that had emerged behind his head like a full moon. It stayed there for a fleeting second. Then, it disappeared. The white moon in his mind transformed into a mighty current of magic power. Then, this current converged and streamed into his lower abdomen as per his guidance. Shi Mu was pleasantly surprised to find that the meridians within his entire body had widened. Moreover, the accumulation of magic power had exponentially increased in his lower abdomen. Shi Mu continued to slip into the dreamland to practice the moon-swallowing art on moonlit nights throughout his journey. He would always need some time to swallow the silver radiance of the moon once he had entered the dream, ever since he had the dream of the white ape practicing the moon-swallowing art in a swift manner. It took him almost an hour every time to absorb the radiance of moonlight completely. But, he had been able to absorb the silver radiance of the moon several times in a row one particular evening. He had taken 6 months to increase the size of the crystal grain to the size of a soapberry fruit in the past. But, he had managed to achieve his desired result in only a fortnight this time. This had become possible because of the fast absorption of the moonlight essence. Shi Mu had refined 3 soapberry fruit-sized crystal grains. He had finally made a breakthrough to the 5th layer of the art of accumulating spirit power on one night after 3 months. Shi Mu sat cross-legged on the ground somewhere in the forest. He felt a torrential flow of magic power in his lower abdomen. His heart quivered with exhilaration. His spirit power had also made an astonishing enhancement along with his magic power. Moreover, he always had a cool and refreshing feeling in his mind. Shi Mu had already broken through the 5th layer of the art of accumulating spirit power. So, he had got promoted from being a magician practitioner to the spirit grade magician. Moreover, he had officially become a formula magician. Suddenly, an idea flashed across his mind. He closed his eyes, and tried to recall the contents pertaining to the Qi Ring pile of the art of accumulating spirit power. This technique was used to attain the 5th layer of this art. He then sprang up from the ground, and walked towards the 2 grazing horses. Shi Mu stopped 10 feet away from the 2 horses. Then, his hand formed a strange gesture. After that, he began to read an incantation. The magic power surged up rapidly within his body. He stretched out his hand towards the 2 horses. He then pointed his finger at them, and shot out a white air mass. Suddenly, the air mass elongated in the air, and took the form of a long and white chain of qi. The horses were alarmed as they saw the white light flying towards them. They tried to evade the attack. But, they failed since there was nothing for them to hide behind. The chain of white qi wound itself around the belly of the 2 horses. Then, it formed a white qi ring, and tied the horses together. The horses looked like conjoined twins under the effect of the formidable binding force. They couldn't separate themselves from each other. The ring of white qi gradually dissipated after a span of 7 or 8 breaths. The horses found themselves free from the shackle after a long struggle and constant neighing. They obviously tried to run away. But, they couldn't escape since they were tied to the tree. Shi Mu nodded with satisfaction. This blow was dangerous enough to hack the enemy into 2 or 3 segments at one fell swoop. Several months later. It was noontime. The scorching and glaring sun was high up in the sky. Shi Mu walked out of the forest that was laden with numerous gigantic and grotesquely shaped trees. He looked famished and exhausted by the long journey. Suddenly, his eyes were drawn towards the 13 gigantic pillar-like black mountain peaks. He got excited. Shi Mu's path had been full of hardships and perils ever since he had been inflicted with the fierce snake tribe's curse. He had been forced to infiltrate the barbarians' wasteland as a result. This condition had lasted for 2 years until this day when he had finally returned to his sect. He had continued to consume a steady stream of blood-strengthening and bone-tempering pills along the way. Moreover, he had often competed against the Xian strength of Yan Luo. This had incredibly boosted up his combat capabilities. In addition, he had made a breakthrough to the 11th stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants a few days back. He had finally attained the consummate stage of this art. Moreover, he was only one step away from stepping into the Xian realm. He shot a glance at the nearest 13th mountain peak. He then hurried in that direction. Shi Mu finally entered the residential area after a quarter of an hour. It was crowded with numerous stone houses. A trace of suspicion flashed across his eyes. He walked through the area. But, he felt that an air of loneliness prevailed in the sect, as if it was deserted. Also, the stream of people that used to shuttle back and forth seemed considerably low now. These people would normally be seen wandering around in the public square that was at the center of the mountain valley. However, even the residential area gave off an ambience of emptiness at this time since there wasn't a single person around. Shi Mu arrived in front of his stone house while being lost in his thoughts. He then opened the door and walked inside. "I'm back." He looked around the room, and found that not a single thing or furniture had changed even after so many years. But, the furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust. Shi Mu finally heaved a sigh of relief. He put down the meteoric hammer and the package from behind his back. He then quickly tidied up his room. After that, he turned around, and walked outside the room. He advanced towards the Bluestone Plaza to find someone to inquire about the situation. He soon arrived near the square after some time. Suddenly, a joyful voice was heard from behind him. "Hey, Shi Mu! So, you've finally returned, ah!" Shi Mu's footsteps stopped. He whirled around, and sized up the young man who was striding over. He saw that the young man had long hair that was trailing over his shoulder. There was a strand of velvety black beard around the corners of his mouth. He had slightly thin facial casts. A sparkling luster could be seen in his eyes whenever he opened and closed them. A faint smile spread across Shi Mu's face. This youth was Bai Shi. He had crossed the Black Demon Sect's threshold with Shi Mu a few years ago. But, he seemed to have matured a lot since then. Moreover, there was a faint aura of Houtian middle stage strength around him. "Brother Bai, what happened to our sect? Why are there just a handful of people around?" Shi Mu asked after an exchange of pleasantries between them. "Hehe, so you're still unaware of it? Everyone in our sect is absorbed in the preparation of the annual competition. We all have to participate in this competition." Bai Shi replied with a smile. Bai Shi's heart skipped a beat as he sensed that the imposing aura around Shi Mu's body was even stronger than his own. "The annual competition of the sect," Shi Mu said in a surprised tone. "Our sect's elders announced the resumption of the annual competition when they heard that an alliance had successfully been formed between the human and the barbarian races. This year's annual matches began some time back. The elders have decided to present astonishing awards to the top 10 rank holders, as this year's annual competition has commenced after a long gap of several years. I've even heard that the first rank holder can be awarded with an exceptionally precious thing. Brother Shi, it would have been good if you had returned a little earlier. The ranking list of the third grade disciples has already been declared. Now, you can only enter the ranking list of second grade disciples. In any case, Brother Shi's current cultivation can easily facilitate him to enter the ranks of the second grade disciples," Bai Shi explained. Shi Mu revealed a trace of a bitter smile as he heard Bai Shi's words. He hadn't exactly hurried back here. But, he had almost let a great opportunity slip by his hands by doing so. However, Shi Mu was an open-minded and optimistic person. So, he began to talk and laugh merrily with Bai Shi. He desperately wanted to participate in the annual matches in order to obtain resources. He wanted to exchange them for pills that could support his practice of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. However, he wasn't in a hurry since he had already attained all the 11 stages of this art. Oh, that's right. Brother Bai, what rank did you get this time? Shi Mu asked in an inquisitive tone. Haha. I'll keep it as a secret for now. You'll know when the time comes, Bai Shi replied with a mysterious laughter. And Xiaoming, is he okay? Shi Mu didn't seem to care about Bai Shi's rank anymore. He then asked. He. Xiaoming is good. Both Lan Feng and Huo Mao turned out safe and sound after the barbarians' invasion. Fortunately, we've already fixed an appointment at the Fragrant River Tavern for the dinner tonight. It seems that you've returned at the right time. It would be better if we go together. It's the same venue where we went before. So, would you like to join our little get-together? Bai Shi said with a smile. I heartily accept your invitation. It was a bliss for Shi Mu to reunite with his old friends. He was delighted. So, he readily accepted Bai Shi's invitation. Brother Shi Mu, let's go and see the annual matches. They'll select the top 10 second-grade disciples today. The chosen disciples are qualified to challenge the experts of the third-grade disciples. The competition will be incomparably splendid. Bai Shi appeared to be in a blissful mood as he turned towards Shi Mu, and invited him to accompany him to see the matches. Shi Mu complied with him without any hesitation. He was also very curious to analyze the strength of the second-grade disciples. They headed to the valley that lay between the 7th and the 8th mountain peaks. This was the designated place where the annual matches were held by their sect. Brother Shi Mu, I had specifically inquired about you a few years ago. I then found that your name wasn't in the list of disciples who died in the battle. Then, why did you return to the sect after such a long time? Bai Shi asked out of curiosity. A bitter smile crawled across Shi Mu's face. He then recounted his experiences during this period, how he had been doomed with the barbarians' totem curse, and how he had crept into the barbarians' wasteland. He withheld the information about the matters that were inappropriate to talk about. However, Bai Shi was dumbfounded to hear about the things that Shi Mu had disclosed to him. He had never thought that Shi Mu could sneak into the barbarians' wasteland on his own. Moreover, he had rescued Princess Huo Wu of the Dachi kingdom, and had went to the barbarians' holy mountain with her. In fact, he had even entered into the portal of the brave warriors that Bai Shi had never even heard of before. His was indeed a strange experience that was loaded with a number of twists and turns. This bizarre experience made Bai Shi look into Shi Mu's eyes. There was a complicated look in Bai Shi's eyes, it revealed both admiration and amazement for Shi Mu. His mouth remained open in astonishment for a while. Bai Shi answered Shi Mu's questions about his experiences during the barbarians' invasion. He didn't have vigorous and intense encounters like Shi Mu's. But, he did have a narrow escape a number of times. Shi Mu also learned from Bai Shi that the percentage of causalities had been very high during the war. Almost 50% of the total 300 or 400 disciples of their sect had suffered severe casualties during the war. Even the old disciples like Wild Zhou and Chu Kun had lost their lives during this war. Shi Mu secretly lamented in his heart as he heard this mournful story. A lot of new disciples had also been recruited in their sect during these past years. Chapter 195, Raising a Toast in Celebration. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu and Bai Shi continued to chat as they walked. They soon arrived in the valley between the 7th and the 8th peaks. This valley was a lot bigger than the one between the 11th and the 12th peaks. Colorful flowers and plants could be seen everywhere, it looked like a huge garden. There was a spacious public square in the center of the valley. It seemed to be around 100 acres wide. There were 10 large rings in a row in the public square. A huge crowd of people had gathered inside the square. Those people were wearing black uniforms of the Black Demon sect. Shi Mu looked around, and calculated the number of people gathered there to be more than 2,000. This number was twice more than that of the people gathered at the time of the smaller competition. It seemed that the Black Demon sect had enrolled a lot of disciples in the past year. Shi Mu found that half of the rings were empty. Only 5 rings were occupied with the shadows of people engaged in fighting. The people standing around the rings were issuing sounds of applaud, and were shouting in surprise from time to time. The environment of the public square seemed incomparably enthusiastic. The 5 occupied rings were fully surrounded by people. So, Shi Mu and Bai Shi had no other choice but to stay 100 or more feet away from the rings. The two of them were watching the competition from a distance without exchanging a single word. Shi Mu could watch everything from a distance of 100 feet owing to his exceptional eyesight. He could watch everything as clearly as if it was happening right in front of his eyes. A youth in white robe was fighting with a man in black robe in the third ring from the left. Both of them were Hotian advanced stage warriors. There was a sword in the white-robed youth's hand. Suddenly, the sword flashed silver-colored lights. The moves of the sword were as meticulous as rain. The silver light of the sword formed some kind of a strange angle. It then surrounded the black-robed man. It took advantage of the gap in his attacks and rushed towards him. The sword light moved in all directions with a shrill ear-piercing sound as the white-robed youth activated his real chi. The sword light's strength seemed to be boundless. The black-robed man was holding a 10 feet long black whip in his hand. The whip danced between its heavy shadows like a spirit snake. A black whip had formed a net in front of his body. It firmly blocked the moves of the sword of the white-robed youth, and failed its attacks in a continuous manner. Bang! Bang! A series of stuffy noises resounded in a continuous manner. The black whip shadow and the silver sword light exploded as they came in contact with each other. Then, they got dispersed. After that, they transformed into invisible air waves, and got diffused in all directions. It made both the fighters feel strong winds on their faces even though they stood several feet away. Brother Shi, that man in the black robe is Wu Chao. There are rumors that he was a middle-leveled Hotian warrior 6 years ago. That Tao Yan in the white robe was an unknown third-grade disciple at that time. But, they're already in the top 10 of the second-grade disciples list. Now, they're among the outstanding warriors amid more than 2,000 disciples of the Black Demon sect. But, I'll defeat them after 3 years, Bai Shi pointed a finger towards the white-robed youth and the black-robed man inside the ring, and said in a confident tone. Brother Bai Shi is very ambitious. We'll practice in order to reach there, Shi Mu praised Bai Shi and replied. Bai Shi nodded. The sword light of the white-robed youth continued to appear and disappear in a strange manner. But, the shadows of the black whip accompanied it constantly. This pattern continued for 10 more strokes. After that, the sword light of the white-robed youth exposed a flaw, and a black whip shadow drilled into his clothes like a viper. Bang! A stuffy sound echoed. Suddenly, the black whip hit the abdomen of the youth in white robe. His body was sent flying out of the ring like a broken sack. Then, he got heavily smashed on the ground. He opened his mouth, and spit out a mouthful of blood. He seemed unable to move for the time being. 2 janitor disciples in black garments rushed out in a fast speed from the crowd. They then lifted the youth in white robe in a proficient manner, and went down while carrying him. The black-robed man collected his whip, and tied it to his right arm. He then went down the ring. He had now entered the top 5 of the second-grade disciples. Everyone standing around the ring exclaimed in admiration. They began to discuss about the black-robed man's martial arts and whip skills. Shi Mu curled up his lips. He then swept his vision towards the rest of the rings. His enthusiasm had strangely come to an end. Bai Shi was still watching the matches with keen interest. So, Shi Mu also remained in his place, and didn't move. But, he began to think of other things. Half an hour later, all the surrounding people had held their breaths. They were looking at the fifth ring. The first and the second-ranked disciples of the second-grade disciples were fighting for the first place. Shi Mu felt that the atmosphere of the public square had become unusual. He saw that a youth with a scar on his face and a youth with a tall and thin stature were intensely fighting in the ring. The scar-faced youth was holding a spear in his hand. A red light was flickering on the head of his spear. The tall youth was holding a long sword in his hand. It was flashing a drizzling light of green color. Shi Mu's heart moved. He had a vague feeling about the sunken-cheeked man. The thin and tall man with long arms and long legs like bamboo poles looked a little familiar. It seemed that Shi Mu had seen him somewhere before. The tall and thin youth's martial arts moves were as fast as lightning. He was spinning all around the scar-faced youth. The long sword in his hand was moving quickly in all the directions. It seemed as if green lightning was pacing around with smooth movements. The spear of the scar-faced youth also seemed extremely strong. Moreover, his real chi had surged up. The swift and fierce strong winds created by his spear seemed as heavy as a mountain. It protected his body in such a manner that there was no space for anything to pass through it. It made the thin and tall youth unable to take advantage of any gap. In addition, his spearhead was making its way into the places that were beyond the people's expectations. It had brought the thin and tall youth almost on the verge of losing a few times. The thin and tall youth was neither arrogant nor impatient. He continued to fight in the same manner for some more time. The spear skills of the scar-faced man had eventually slowed down. A radiance flashed in the eyes of the tall and thin youth. He recalled his old move, and took advantage of the inferior power of the spear. He then hit his feet on the ground, and his figure was shot forward like an arrow from a bow. After that, he arrived in front of the scar-faced man in the blink of an eye. The green light on his sword brightened as he waved his right hand. Then, 10 or more green sword lights flew out towards the spear-holding arm of the scar-faced youth in a flash. A complacent look flashed in the scar-faced youth's eyes. He lifted his right hand, and revealed a circular barrel-shaped concealed weapon in his cuffs. Then, he shot out a silver needle in a flash. He moved his figure backwards at the same time. An angry look flashed in the tall and thin youth's eyes. He moved his mouth, and the fingers of his left hand formed a strange gesture. Then, a green drizzling shield appeared in his hand out of thin air. The silver needle lashed on the shield with a ding-dong sound. After that, a small tornado emerged on the surface of the shield, and started to rotate in all directions. The wind locust shield technique. It's a spirit-grade technique, someone from among the crowd shouted with great surprise. Suddenly, the imposing aura of the thin and tall youth changed. Then, a tyrannical aura not less than the Houtian summit level erupted around him. His figure flashed and rushed towards the scar-faced youth with great speed. He soon rushed past the figure of the scar-faced youth. He then waved his right hand, and a wide green sword curtain rushed towards his opponent. Bang! A loud sound echoed. The green sword curtain whipped the chest of the scar-faced youth. His body was sent flying out of the ring. He then fell on the ground. His body rolled over a few loops before it came to a stop. A dozen or more wounds on his body started to bleed profusely. Then, his eyes rolled over, and he lost his consciousness. That Houtian summit level warrior was also a spirit-grade magician. There was an absolute silence around the ring. The pupils of an elder of the sect shrank. He was one of the referees, and was seated in the place above the ring. 2 janitor disciples wearing black robes rushed out from the crowd. They staunched up the wounds of the scar-faced youth. Then, they lifted him, and rushed down. "Who's this man?" Shi Mu looked curiously towards the thin and tall youth in the ring and asked. "Brother Shi, you don't know Duan Qianli?" He was on the top of the 3rd grade disciples list back in those days. "I didn't expect that he would become so strong. He's among the top 10 2nd grade disciples. Perhaps, he can defeat anyone." Bai Shi's eyes revealed genuine colors of adoration as he said. "So, it's like that. I didn't know. Shi Mu smiled. He now remembered that he had asked Huo Mao about this man when he had participated in the sect's regular competition. Suddenly, the elder of the sect sitting in the ring announced in a clear voice, I declare that Duan Qianli is the winner. He has advanced to the first place among the second-grade disciples. His voice echoed all over the square. It was even louder than the cheering sounds of the disciples. Shi Mu, Bai Shi, Xiao Ming, and one other person arrived at the Fragrant River Tavern of Bluestone Square near the 13th peak in the evening. Then, they went directly to the third floor. The first two floors of the restaurant were full of splendor. They had been decorated in a magnificent manner. But, the third floor had been styled differently. Its decoration wasn't much gorgeous. Only a few dragon and phoenix images had been carved there. It had been styled in a simple and unadorned manner. Going by the decorations in this place, it doesn't seem to be so cheap, right? Shi Mu looked at the decorations around him. He then said with laughter. Bai Shi smiled, but he didn't say anything. It's obvious. We all have gathered today. So, it's a special occasion. It can't be shabby. Xiao Ming stood beside them. He said with a mysterious smile. Then, Xiao Ming pulled Shi Mu inside a private room. Two people were already sitting in the room. Shi Mu was startled as he recognized these two people. One of them was a young girl in a blue robe. She had an elegant figure, and a pretty face. This girl was none other than Lan Feng. The other person was a young man who was wearing a yellow robe. He had a simple appearance, he was Huo Mao. Shi Mu hadn't seen them in several years. The appearance of these two people hadn't changed much from earlier. But, it could be determined from the real qi fluctuating in their bodies that these two had made an excellent progress in their cultivations. Shi Mu. Hey! Brother Shi! Lan Feng and Huo Mao were surprised when they saw Shi Mu coming in. We haven't met since ages, Shi Mu greeted the two of them with a smile. Lan Feng and Shi Mu weren't familiar with each other. So, she just nodded to indicate him to take a seat. But, Huo Mao and Shi Mu were quite familiar with each other. So, Huo Mao was happy to see Shi Mu. He dragged Shi Mu to make him sit beside him, and started to chat with him with zest. He then asked Shi Mu about his experiences in the past years. Bai Shi and Xiao Ming also greeted Lan Feng. Huo Mao chatted with Shi Mu for a while, and found that he had entered into the barbarians' wasteland. Moreover, he had helped the human race in having the peace talks, and forming an alliance with the barbarian race. It seemed that this news hadn't been spread among the common disciples of the Black Demon sect. Shi Mu had no intention to flaunt. But, he roughly spoke some words related to his fights in the front line. Today everyone has gathered here because of a rare occasion. It should be celebrated because this time brother Bai Shi and sister Lan Feng have entered into the top 50 list of the second-grade disciples. Xiao Ming stood up after a short while, and raised a toast with a smile on his face. So, that's what it is. You hid this from me. Well, congratulations. Shi Mu rose up his wine cup with a smile, and congratulated Bai Shi and Lan Feng. It happened by fluke. Both of them seemed to be proud that they had entered into the top 50 list of the second-ranked disciples. In fact, Lan Feng's usually indifferent face also exposed a smile. Haha! Brother Xiao, why don't you tell us about yourself? You've now entered into top 30 ranks of the second-grade disciples. This is so much better than mine, Huo Mao laughed out loud and said. Brother Huo overpraised me. Xiao Ming cupped his hands in salutation towards Huo Mao. After that, all four of them drank the toast. Then, Xiao Ming recalled something. He looked towards Shi Mu with a feeling of pity and said, Let me tell you that this time you've been a little unfortunate, brother Shi Mu. You couldn't keep up with us this time. Otherwise, you would have easily fetched a good rank in the second-ranked disciples with your strength. It's okay. I'll participate tomorrow, Shi Mu said with a smile. Shi Mu had concealed his aura on purpose, so that Xiaoming and others would feel that they had a stronger aura than his. But, nobody knew that Shi Mu had already stepped into the consummate stage of the Houtian realm. Chapter 196, Unexpected. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Suddenly, the door of the room was pushed open. Shi Mu and the others turned their heads, and saw a golden-haired youth with blue eyes entering the room. It turned out that they were familiar with this person. It was none other than Jin Huan. He used to be the leader of the Holy Spirit Association back in those days. He had made a great progress in his cultivation. The aura being emitted by him had already reached to the Houtian advanced stage. He bore a proud and aloof expressions on his face. "Brother Jin, please come in, it's really great to see you. Please have a seat." Bai Shi seemed to be excited. He stood up and welcomed Jin Huan. The rest of them, including Lan Feng, also stood up one by one with a respectful expression on their faces. Only Shi Mu remained seated on his chair. "Brother Bai is polite. We all are the members of the Holy Spirit Association. You and Brother Xiao have acquired a good position among the second-grade disciples. I'm extremely proud of you, as I was the one who recommended you to join the Holy Spirit Association. I want to congratulate both of you." Jin Huan walked in with a smile and said. "Brother Jin has been in the top 50 list of the second-grade disciples for a long time. And, you've jumped to the 16th place this time. I'm sure that you'll be in the list of top 10 next year," Bai Shi said with a smile. Jin Huan laughed out loud. Then, he turned his vision to look towards Shi Mu, who was still sitting. His complexion sank. "Oh, who's this fellow? His face seems unfamiliar," Jin Huan said in a displeased voice. Shi Mu had left for the frontier back in those days. He had returned several times during this period, but he had never made any contact with Jin Huan. Now, his personality traits and skin color had changed, so much so that Jin Huan didn't recognize him for a moment. "I'm Shi Mu. It seems that an honored person like Brother Jin has a limited memory. He has clearly forgotten me," Shi Mu said with a strange smile. Jin Huan was startled. He then carefully sized up Shi Mu. "So, your brother Shi, eh? Your cultivation?" Jin Huan's complexion changed. He was unable to determine the exact level of Shi Mu's cultivation even with his Houtian advanced stage strength. "I didn't expect to see you after so many years. Brother Shi, your cultivation seems great. You've already stepped into the advanced stage," Jin Huan said with a serious look, regardless of the presence of Bai Shi and others. Shi Mu smiled faintly. He neither admitted nor denied Jin Huan's words. Bai Shi and the others were dumbfounded as they heard this. They looked towards Shi Mu with an unbelievable look. They had thought that Shi Mu's cultivation was just a little higher than theirs. But they hadn't expected that Shi Mu had already stepped into the advanced stage, and had become an excellent Houtian warrior. He. "So, Brother Shi has hidden this from us. I admire him for that." Bai Shi was the first to react. He said with a forced smile. "Brother Jin, please take the seat of honor." Xiaoming hastily arranged a seat for Jin Huan. After that, he pushed his seat for Shi Mu. This seat was right next to Jin Huan's. Shi Mu declined for a little while, but Xiaoming and others insisted repeatedly. So, he had to sit down. "I didn't think that Brother Shi's strength would make so much progress in such a short span of time. Is it because of your adventures in the war with the barbarian race?" Jin Huan asked with a smile. His arrogant expression began to disappear. He seemed to be subtle in his words. "Brother Jin is joking. How could there be an adventure? I practiced martial arts and easily advanced to the higher level." Shi Mu didn't reveal anything. Instead, he laughed out loud and replied. Jin Huan's eyes flashed. He knew that Shi Mu didn't mean what he said, but he didn't question him any further. He knew that Shi Mu's practice of the art of breeding heavenly elephants was an easy technique. But, it was improbable for his strength to advance so quickly even if he had had a steady flow and had taken sufficient pills. Bai Shi and Xiaoming were the most eloquent and fluent speakers among all the people who were present in the room. So, they soon tried and made the atmosphere in the room lively. Someone pushed open the door of the private room after a short while. A youth of around 25 years of age walked in. He had a thin and tall stature, and a grave and stern expression on his face. He then swept his vision towards everyone present in the room. Everyone present including Bai Shi and Xiaoming were startled. They didn't know this man. Moreover, they hadn't invited this man to the party. The imposing aura on the tall man's body wasn't revealed. But, he clearly seemed to be a Hotian advanced stage expert. "Senior brother, we're partying here." "I don't know your excellency." Bai Shi was the first one to stand up. He then cupped his hands towards the man in greeting, and spoke in a polite manner. "He's brother yet." Jun Huan stood up and cupped his hands in greeting. He then spoke up before Bai Shi could finish speaking. "Everyone, let me introduce you to this man. He's Ye Kun. He is on 12th position among the second-grade disciples. But, he stays quite low-key. So, everyone might not know him." Jin Huan introduced the new entry to Shi Mu and the others. Bai Shi and the others looked surprised as they heard that the rank of the grave and stern-looking man was higher than that of Jin Huan's. Now, they looked at this man in a new light. "Brother Jin overpraises me," the grave and stern youth said with a smile. He then nodded towards Jin Huan. After that, he moved his vision towards Shi Mu and asked, "Is this brother Shi Mu?" "Yes, I'm Shi Mu. May I ask brother Ye for some advice?" Shi Mu felt a little strange. He then stood up and asked. "I'm not in the position to give you any advice. I've come here to pass an order on behalf of the head and the respected elders of the sect," the grave and stern youth said. He then took out an order paper charm from his bosom. Several fly-sized letters were written on it in series. The head of the sect orders that third-grade disciple Shi Mu has provided a great service in the war against the barbarian race. So, an exception has been made for him. Now, he's permitted to compete in tomorrow's competition, and can challenge a second-grade disciple of his choice. And, he can take the place of that disciple if he wins. The grave and stern youth read the paper charm in a clear voice. Shi Mu wasn't expecting this news. So, he looked a little blank. Then, he felt exalted in his heart. The other people present in the room went in an uproar. Their vision kept shifting between Shi Mu and the grave and stern youth. "Brother Shi Mu, think about this order of elders and the head of the sect carefully tonight. You can also give the answer tomorrow. If you don't have any intention to participate tomorrow, then you can go to the head of the sect, and explain him your situation." The grave and stern youth handed over the order paper charm to Shi Mu and spoke. "Brother Ye, thank you for coming, and informing me. I accept this order, since the head of the sect and the elders think that way." Shi Mu stretched out his hand, and took the charm paper. He then cupped his hands towards the grave youth and replied. "So, brother Shi Mu's interested in participating. Then, you must think carefully tonight about whom you are going to challenge tomorrow." A cold and detached expression flashed across the eyes of the grave and stern youth. He then nodded, and turned around to exit the room. "There's no need to think. I'm going to challenge the disciple on first place among the second-grade disciples, Senior Duan Qian Li," Shi Mu replied. Everyone was dumbstruck. They looked towards Shi Mu with surprise. The grave and stern youth was also startled. He turned over, and looked towards Shi Mu. "Well, I'll convey this remark of brother Shi Mu's," he said and turned around. He then stepped out of the room. "Brother Shi Mu, this is..." Jin Huan looked a little sluggish as he looked towards Shi Mu. He was unable to complete his sentence for a while. "Brother Shi Mu, your strength has reached the advanced stage, but did you not see the strength of Duan Qian Li in the ring today? His strength has already reached the consummate level of the Hotian realm. Moreover, he's a spirit-grade magician. Are you serious? Bai Shi asked. Oh, yes. It's a rare thing in the sect. This is a great opportunity for you. But, it would be better if you challenge some other person to ensure that you hold a good position among the second-grade disciples, Xiao Ming advised. Thank you everyone for your concern. But, I've already decided. Let's just drink first, Shi Mu smiled and replied with confidence. The other people didn't know what to say. Jin Huan shot a glance at Shi Mu. He wanted to say something, but stopped. He seemed curious. What kind of a great service was provided by Shi Mu that made the sect's head and the elders break the usual practice without any hesitation? The night passed in the blink of an eye. It was early in the morning. There was a huge ring inside the plaza built in the valley between the 5th and the 6th peaks of the Black Demon sect. The dimensions of the ring were about 1,000 square feet. 4 black stone pillars stood on the 4 corners of the ring. Several charm character patterns were engraved on the stone pillars. They were faintly distributing rays of light. This was the last day of the competition. According to the usual practice, top 10 disciples of the second grade would challenge the first grade disciples. But, each person only had one chance. If any second grade disciple won the fight, then he or she would take the position of his or her opponent. He or she would then advance to the first grade disciples. Then, they would take benefit of the best resources of the sect, and would receive great training by the sect. However, the first grade disciples were extremely powerful. Only a few second grade disciples had been able to win the challenge against them in generations. A first grade disciple could become an elder of the sect only if he or she would advance to the Xian Tian realm. Then, their position would become vacant. Moreover, the top 10 disciples amongst the first grade disciples could challenge each other once the second grade disciples would finish the challenge. The rules for their fights were also the same. The winner would take the position of the loser. The ranks were to be determined in this manner. Everyone had only one chance in these fights also. The disciples of the Black Demon sect were gathered at the main gate despite it being early morning. There were 2,000 or 3,000 people. They had surrounded the ring, not even a single person could penetrate through the crowd. A black square-shaped stone tablet stood beside the ring, it was several meters high. The names of the top 10 disciples among the first grade disciples were written on it. The names were arranged in lower to higher ranks. 10 disciples stood in a row under the stone tablet. These disciples included both males and females. Each one of them looked extraordinary in their manners. All of them had the cultivation of the Houtian consummate level. Shi Mu, Bai Shi, Xiao Ming, Jin Huan, and others stood outside the ring. A few people were chatting on the either sides while looking towards the stone tablet and the top 10 disciples. Mo Ning, Qian Xiang, Bai Shuixiu. These were the names of the top 10 disciples among the first grade disciples written on the stone tablet. Shi Mu knitted his brows. He hadn't paid attention to these people before. So, these names seemed unfamiliar to him. Brother Shi, these first grade disciples have cultivated their strengths behind closed doors. You don't know much about them, right? Bai Shi spoke with a smile as he looked at Shi Mu's expression. Shi Mu smiled and nodded. He. So. I'm right. Let me introduce Brother Shi to them, Bai Shi smiled. These are the top 10 fist-ranked disciples. The man on the extreme left is on the first place. His name is Mo Ning. He had reached the consummate level of the Houtian realm a few years ago. He's a water attribute technique practitioner. His famous martial skill is art of the concealed cloudy sword. It's said that his moves are so quick that sometimes his opponents get defeated without even getting to see him. Shi Mu nodded. He then looked towards a grey-haired youth standing on the left side under the black stone tablet. That strong black man is on the second place. His name is Qian Xiang. His body bears rarely seen rock bloodline. So, he's a practitioner of a strong, stable, and healthy cultivation technique. His defense is extremely strong as a monster beast. Third is Sister Bai Shuixiu. She's a water attribute spirit grade magician. She'll hopefully advance to the star-ranked magician realm, Bai Shi continued to speak with assurance. He introduced Shi Mu to all the 10 first-grade disciples. Shi Mu nodded. The innate talents of these first-grade disciples were extremely remarkable. It was no wonder that they occupied the positions of core disciples of the Black Demon sect. Shi Mu's vision flashed. It seemed that he had already decided something in his heart. Chapter 197, Mockery. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. There was a 30 feet high platform near the stone tablet. The head of the Black Demon sect and an elder of the Xian Tian realm sat on the platform to watch the last few matches of the competition. The head of the Black Demon sect looked towards the elder of the Xian Tian realm and sighed. There used to be more than 20 Xian Tian elders in the Black Demon sect. But, 4 or 5 of them had died while fighting with the barbarian race on the frontier. Now, only less than 20 of them were left. However, the barbarian war hadn't been completely useless. The junior disciples of the sect had gathered at the place. They were huge in number even though their number was comparatively lower than that of before the war. Moreover, a huge progress had been made in their cultivations after the experience of several years of war. And, this point had been confirmed in the competition. Suddenly, the head of the Black Demon sect looked on his side, and saw that Jin Xiaochai looked a little absent-minded. "Xiaochai, why do you look as if you don't have any spirit these days?" the head of the Black Demon sect asked. "It's nothing. It's just a random thought." "Thank you for your concern, head." Jin Xiaochai turned her beautiful eyes with a splendid smile on her face, and replied in a soft tone. The head's grizzled eyebrows moved as he looked away from her. After that, he stood up and took 2 steps forward. The disciples in the crowd near the ring became quiet as soon as they saw this. Then, they became ready to listen to the instructions of the head of the sect. "Ladies and gentlemen, the second-grade disciples have been ranked now. Today is the last day of the annual competition. So, the top 10 ranked disciples among the second-grade disciples will challenge the first-grade disciples. After that, the first-grade disciples will challenge each other, and the top 10 disciples amongst them will be determined. I believe that everyone knows the process already. So, I'll not give unnecessary details." The voice of the head of the Black Demon sect wasn't too loud. But, it still reached the ears of the people standing at the rear. "I want to announce one more thing before starting the competition." The head of the Black Demon sect changed the topic of discussion and said. Bai Shi, Xiaoming, and the other people stood near the ring, their bodies shook as they heard this. They moved their eyes towards Shi Mu, and saw that Shi Mu was in a calm state. There hadn't been the slightest change in his expressions. They couldn't help but admire his calm attitude. Disciple Shi Mu went to the war against the barbarian race, and went to the barbarians' wasteland all alone. Moreover, he helped our union to have peace talks, and made the barbarians sign an agreement to form alliance with the human race. He has provided a great service to the union. The head of the Black Demon sect looked towards Shi Mu, who was standing among the audience. All the disciples were shocked as they heard this. They all moved their eyes towards Shi Mu. Even the top 10 first-grade disciples shifted their gazes to look at him. Shi Mu's face was expressionless. He didn't react to the attention of everyone present in his surroundings. Shi Mu returned yesterday, and missed the chance to participate in the competition because of this. So, the elders and I've decided that we would make an exception, and give him one more opportunity. Before we proceed with the annual competition, I would let him choose anyone from the second-grade disciples to challenge. He would take his opponent's position if he wins, the head of the Black Demon sect said in one breath. Everyone started to discuss among themselves as they heard this. But, nobody objected to the head's words. "Well, now that you have no objection, Brother Zhen, it's your turn," the head of the Black Demon sect said to an old man standing next to him. He was dressed in a grey robe with a goat beard. He then went over to his seat and sat down. The grey-robed old man nodded. His figure flashed like a grey light as he landed on the ring. Yesterday, the head of the sect sent a man to ask Shi Mu about this offer. Shi Mu has accepted the decision. He has decided to challenge the disciple having the first place among the second-grade disciples. Duan Qianli, the grey-robed old man, turned towards the audience, and declared in a clear voice. Bang! The disciples among the audience exploded like a boiling pot. Duan Qianli had amazed everyone with a single feat in the competition, and had won the first position among the second-grade disciples on the previous day. Anyone could see that he was extraordinarily valiant. But Shi Mu had challenged him. Shi Mu and Duan Qianli, both of you come into the ring. The old grey-robed man paused for a while. He then said. Shi Mu walked to the ring as he heard this announcement. The disciples in the surroundings got out of his way as they saw him coming. He hadn't brought his black blade as its hilt was slightly damaged. Instead, he climbed to the ring with the meteoric hammer in his hand. What kind of a weapon is this? It seems from its appearance, is it the meteoric hammer? Bai Shi and others were startled as they saw the meteoric hammer in Shi Mu's hand. They all knew that Shi Mu was an expert in using blades. But they had never seen him using this kind of a weapon. Many other disciples standing outside the ring stared blankly, and issued a roar of laughter. Shi Mu's meteoric hammer looked too simple and crude. Its model looked extremely ugly. It couldn't even be called a meteoric hammer in the true sense. It seemed as if iron chains had been tied to a piece of stone. Everyone looked towards the chains tied to the meteoric hammer. But they were made of ordinary steel. So, it was easy to chop them off even though they were extremely thick. Shi Mu was going to participate in the annual competition with this simple and crude weapon. It was simply ridiculous. The head and other elders of the Black Demon sect also exposed traces of amazement on their faces. Jin Xiaochai looked towards Shi Mu's feet. His feet weren't very wide, but they sunk with each of his steps. There was amazement in Jin Xiaohai's eyes also. The corners of her mouth curled up like an arc. A shadow of a thin and tall man also flashed on the opposite side of the ring as soon as Shi Mu climbed over. It was none other than Duan Qianli. Everyone issued bursts of exclamation in admiration. But the strengths of the disciples in the audience was too weak to see his shadow. Brother Mo, what do you think? Who would win? Qian Xiang touched his fat belly, and asked a silver-haired youth standing beside him. This Shi Mu's cultivation has already reached the consummate level of the Houtian realm. But his weapon looks quite heavy. He must have cultivated his spirit powers also. That Duan Qianli has an appreciable speed. Both the men have their own qualities in martial arts. But Duan Qianli is a famous spirit-grade magician. So, his chances of winning are more than Shi Mu's, Mo Ning said with some hesitation. Brother Mo has sharp vision. You've analyzed all this in a single glance, Qian Xiang spoke with a loud laughter. He seemed to acknowledge Mo Ning's opinion. Bai Shuixiu stood on his side, but she didn't say anything. However, a sneering expression could be seen on her face. What's wrong? Does Sister Bai think that I'm wrong? Mo Ning sensed the expression of Bai Shuixiu. He then said in a cold tone. How can this girl dare to think like that? No matter who wins Shi Mu or Duan Qianli, he'll certainly challenge us after that. So, it would be better if we carefully examined their strengths instead of guessing the outcome of the match between these two. We won't have to be ashamed in front of everyone that way, Bai Shuixiu replied in a sarcastic tone. Haha, these two have just reached the consummate level in martial arts. They're no threat to us. Does Sister Bai think so highly of them? Mo Ning laughed and said. Bai Shuixiu gave cold expressions. She turned over, and stopped paying attention to the two of them. Qian Xiang touched his belly, and abstained from speaking any further. A ray of light flashed in Mo Ning's eyes. But he also kept his mouth shut. Shi Mu looked at the tall and thin man in front of him and smiled. Duan Qianli thought of showing off. After all, his speed was extremely fast. Shi Mu, I'll make you regret this decision. Duan Qianli sized Shi Mu up and down with a cold and viper-like look. He then said in a cold voice. Oh! Let's wait and see, Shi Mu replied with an expressionless face. An angry look flashed in Duan Qianli's eyes. He waved his hand, and a long and slender sword appeared in his hand. That sword was emitting a faint green light. Anyone could tell that it was a high-level magic tool. You dared to come in the ring with this kind of a weapon. You're acting in a reckless manner. Duan Qianli looked towards the meteoric hammer in Shi Mu's hand, and spoke in mockery. Thank you so much for your concern, Shi Mu laughed and replied. Then, a strange awe swept across his eyes. He started to shake his iron chains softly. The grey-robed old man recited an incantation and waved his hand. The 4 black pillars near the ring started to emit white light, and quickly got interlinked together. Then, they formed a white transparent boundary around the ring. The competition begins, the grey-robed old man shouted and moved his body backwards. Duan Qianli looked in front of him with a dull expression as if he had absolute control over Shi Mu. Suddenly, an intense hatred appeared in his heart towards Shi Mu. He shouted loudly. Then, a green light flashed and covered his entire body with a layer of faint green light. It was the body lifting technique. Duan Qianli's shadow flashed. Then, his movements extended to its maximum speed, and he transformed into yellow shadows. He then rushed towards Shi Mu. The long green sword in his hand released a green light. Suddenly, 10 or more thick sword shadows went drizzling towards Shi Mu. Duan Qianli made a strange gesture with his other hand at the same time. He then waved it heavily towards Shi Mu. 5 green blade winds appeared, and went rotating towards Shi Mu. Duan Qianli exposed a proud smile on his face. Shi Mu could only retreat or try to defend himself in order to confront so many attacks at once. Duan Qianli had planned to put all of his strategies to use in this manner. He wanted to defeat Shi Mu as early as possible. Duan Qianli looked towards Shi Mu. He wanted to take a look at Shi Mu's frightened face. But, he saw that Shi Mu's face revealed tranquil expressions, he looked calm and composed. Duan Qianli's heart thumped as he felt that there was something wrong. Suddenly, Shi Mu shouted, and shook his arm. Then, his real qi rushed out from his right arm. He then swung the meteoric hammer in his hand, the hammerhead carried a fierce gale force as if it was a meteor. It then got knocked against the sword shadows and the blade winds. Bang! Bang! A couple of loud sounds echoed. The sword shadows and the blade winds shattered like eggs before the hammerhead. Duan Qianli couldn't even get any time to react. Suddenly, he found a shadow flashing in front of his body. The meteoric hammer had almost reached his body in the blink of an eye. Duan Qianli felt shocked, it was too late to dodge the attack. So, he promptly moved his hands to form a strange gesture, and spit out something from his mouth. Then, he shouted. Suddenly, a green drizzling wind shield appeared in front of his body. Then, small tornadoes began to rise up on its surface. The wind shield had appeared in a flash. The meteoric hammer ferociously bombarded on the wind shield. A chi sound rang out in the air. The wind shield and the tornadoes broke down with a loud rumble as soon as they were hit by the hammer. The momentum of the meteoric hammer was unstoppable. It went bombarding towards Duan Qianli's chest. Duan Qianli's complexion changed. His mouth issued wild shouts of despair. It was a crucial junction of life and death. Suddenly, a grey light was shot by one side. Then, a grey light shield was formed in front of Duan Qianli's chest. Bang! A stuffy sound echoed. The meteoric hammer and the grey light shield collided. Then, several light rays flashed from the shield in a violent manner. But, they got shattered in a span of a breath's time. After that, the meteoric hammer hit heavily against Duan Qianli's chest. The meteoric hammer had smashed 2 shields in succession. So, its formidable power had been reduced. Blood started to spurt out of Duan Qianli's mouth. Then, sounds of cracking of unknown number of chest bones were heard. Duan Qianli's body was sent out flying upside down like a broken sack. It got knocked against the boundary of the ring, and fell to the ground. Chapter 198, Fight between the first grade and the second grade. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu's vision flashed. He leant his figure forward, and quickly ran forward. Suddenly, a shadow flashed before Duan Qianli's body. It turned out that the grey-robed old man had appeared in front of him in order to defend him. The outcome of the battle has already been decided. So, there's no need to hit him again. The grey-robed old man looked towards Shi Mu and spoke. Shi Mu smiled. He then shook the chains in his arm, and the meteoric hammer came revolving and flying backwards. He caught it, and held it in his hand. The outer corners of the grey-robed old man's eyes twitched as he looked at the meteoric hammer in Shi Mu's hand. He then squatted down. After that, he took out a green magic charm, and pasted it on Duan Qianli's chest. A beam of green light came out of it, and covered the wound on Duan Qianli's chest. The painful look on Duan Qianli's face slowly vanished. He then lay his head on one side, and lost consciousness. The grey-robed old man waved his hand, and a white light went flying to enter into the stone pillars near the ring. The white boundary around the ring flashed and disappeared. The winner is Shi Mu, the grey-robed old man announced. Everyone near the ring was silent. They were dumbstruck. But, they issued a sky-shaking scream as they heard the announcement. Mo Ning's complexion became ugly, he felt a little embarrassed. He had predicted a moment ago that Duan Qianli would win the match. So, the outcome had been very unexpected for him. He didn't think that Shi Mu would defeat this man in one move. It was a slap on his face. Bai Shuixiu shot a glance at Mo Ning. She had a look of mockery in her eyes. Qianxiang wrinkled his brows. He looked towards the meteoric hammer in Shi Mu's hand. But, he didn't have a scornful look in his eyes. A few janitor disciples came, and lifted Duan Qianli, who was seriously hurt and unconscious. He had defeated a powerful opponent with his astonishing strength a day ago. Then, he had stood proudly in the ring to enjoy the glory of attention of the huge crowd. He had been high-spirited. But, he hadn't thought that he would have to leave the ring in a similar manner on the next day itself. Everyone looked towards unconscious Duan Qianli with pity. But then, they moved their gazes towards Shi Mu. The head of Black Demon Sect and elders sitting on the high platform near the ring also revealed surprise on their faces. A strange splendor flickered in Jin Xiaohai's eyes as she looked towards Shi Mu. It couldn't be determined what she was thinking. Silence. The ranking of the second-grade disciples is done. Now, the top 10 disciples of the second grade will come over, and challenge the top 10 disciples of the first grade for the competition. The grey-robed old man stood in the middle of the ring and said. Everyone became silent as soon as they heard this. Then, they focused their attention on him. The remaining top 9 disciples among the second grade disciples also came out from the crowd. Shi Mu went down the ring, and stood on the left side of those 9 people. Brother Shi. Congratulations on winning the first rank. Brother Shi is really tremendous. Those 9 people expressed goodwill towards Shi Mu either by nodding towards him or by showing expression of fondness on their faces. Shi Mu showed no arrogance. He also nodded towards the 9 people, but didn't say anything. After that, he looked respectfully towards the top 10 core disciples of the first grade who stood nearby. He swept his gaze back and forth towards those 10 people. Finally, his vision fell on Mo Ning's body. Mo Ning immediately sensed Shi Mu's line of sight. So, he also turned to look at him. The atmosphere fluctuated violently as their eyes met. Mo Ning felt as if his eyes were slightly pricked, and his heart felt a jolt. The outer corner of his eyes slightly trembled. Shi Mu remained motionless. Then, a curve appeared on the corners of his mouth. Moning's heart blazed with fury. An ice-cold look flashed through his eyes as he narrowed them. According to the rules, every second-grade disciple has only one chance to challenge a first-grade disciple. Every fight would be an event of life and death. If a person falls on the ground, and can't fight anymore or opens his mouth to admit his or her defeat, then the opponent can't kill him or her, the grey-robed old man said with a dull expression. Yes, Shi Mu and the first-grade disciples said in agreement. Well, the challenge begins now, the grey-robed old man nodded, and announced in a clear voice. The common disciples near the ring started to discuss among themselves. Their faces exposed colors of excitement. They started to guess about the person who would be the first one to raise a challenge. Most of the high ranks of the disciples of the first grade remained the same in the annual competition every year. In fact, no one even raised a challenge at times. It seemed to be a good idea because there was no one among the second-grade disciples who could win a challenge against the first-grade disciples. The success rate of such a challenge wasn't high. But, these fights were extremely wonderful. It was a treat for the eyes of the people watching. After all, they all were Hotian warriors. So, the competition was extremely beneficial for the practice of these Hotian disciples. A youth with a slender body and messy hair came out from among the top 10 disciples of the second grade. He was holding a dark red pike in his hand. The pike had charm characters inscribed on its surface. It didn't seem to be a low-level magic tool. I'm Meihu, and I want to challenge Brother Qiao. Qiao Zio of 9th rank, the messy-haired youth said. Shi Mu noticed that the messy-haired youth was on 5th rank among the second-grade disciples. His aura was steady, but it didn't seem to be far away from the consummate level of the Hotian realm. His eyes were dark red in color. They seemed like that because of some kind of blood vessels in his body. He had challenged Jiao Ji. He was a short, but strong man. His arms were quite long. They were hanging on his sides, and were almost touching his knees. His palms were also unusual, they looked like palm leaf fans. It was because of the practice of some kind of boxing technique. Shi Mu turned his eyes towards Qiao Ji's body, and his face exposed a smiling expression. He rested his eyes on him. Qiao Ji's figure flashed and jumped into the ring like a yellow shadow as soon as he heard that someone had challenged him. He then turned around, and looked towards the messy-haired youth. He exposed an evil grin on the corner of his mouth. The complexion of the messy-haired youth sank as he looked at the quick moves of Qiao Ji. He had challenged Qiao Ji because of his small stature. He had thought that he would win the fight quickly. But now, it seemed that he had made a mistake. However, he couldn't go back on his challenge. So, he clenched his teeth, and jumped over into the ring. The fight begins, the grey-robed old man shouted. He then turned on the restriction boundary around the ring. The messy-haired youth stomped his foot on the ground in the ring, and his body was shot out like an arrow from a bowstring. He then moved the dark red pike in his hand several times. A cold light flashed, and the charm characters on the pike shone. The pike head immediately got transformed into several dark red pike shadows. The shadows directly went towards Qiao Ji. Qiao Ji exposed a sneer on his face. He then shouted, and a burst of chaotic sounds was heard from his body. Then, his body became at least 1 foot taller. His arms also showed a change, and a blue-veined pattern appeared on them. His palms had also bulged up to double their original size. Then, black gloves appeared on his hands out of thin air. They were faintly emitting metallic rays. Qiao Ji bombarded his fist with a hoo sound. A great fist wind rose up, and waves of air were issued in the entire ring. Loud metal clanging sounds were heard as the dark red spike shadows scattered. The messy-haired youth retreated a few steps. His complexion looked flushed. Qiao Ji was becoming more and more dominant, he wasn't sparing his opponent. His body transformed into yellow shadows, and went swooping down. He bombarded his hands with a hoo sound at the same time. 2 valiant and extremely powerful waves wildly rushed forth. The messy-haired youth's complexion changed. He gripped the pike in both his hands, and the dark red pike got transformed into 2 short spears. Then, the 2 spears turned into 2 red dragons with a loud sound. They started to dance wildly in the surroundings. Bang! Bang! 2 loud sounds echoed. Qiao Ji made some more moves. The messy-haired youth's body was sent out flying. The red dragons got defeated in a flash. Then, the 2 short spears also shook, and went out flying. The area between the thumb and the forefinger of his hand was split open. Then, his body got knocked against the boundary of the ring. After that, he flipped over, and fell down on the ground. A mouthful of blood gushed out from his mouth. I admit defeat. The messy-haired youth looked towards Qiao Ji. He seemed to be angry with himself. His face exposed frightening expressions. He then said hastily even before he could get up. A black fist stopped half a foot away from his head. Qiao Ji laughed grimly, and took back his fist. A thunderous sound of applause was heard. The boundaries around the ring flashed and disappeared. The messy-haired youth had an ashamed look across his face. He collected his broken spears, and jumped down the ring. Qiao Ji also turned over, and jumped down the ring. He then walked over and stood in his original place. He felt that it wasn't worthy to sweep his vision towards the second-grade disciples. Qiao Ji's victory seemed to be clean and nimble. The difference between the strengths of both the sides could be clearly seen. So, the complexion of the top 10 disciples of the second grade changed. They exchanged glances with each other. Nobody dared to step forward to raise a challenge for a while. A little time passed. Then, a youth in a white robe with a sword on his back slowly came out. I'm Yu Zheng. I want to challenge Sister Su Ling of 10th rank among the first grade disciples. The white-robed youth's eyes flashed. He then said. Everyone outside of the ring started to discuss in soft voices. This Yu Zheng was on the second position after Shi Mu among the second-grade disciples. But, he was very conservative to challenge the man at 10th rank among the first-grade disciples. A red-robed girl with ice-cold expressions moved out from the disciples of the first grade. A long and fiery sword was hung from her waist. You want to challenge me? You're quite courageous, the red-robed woman said in a cold tone as both of them arrived in the ring. Her body emitted a powerful aura. It was fierce like intense flames, and was oppressing the aura of the white-robed youth. The complexion of the white-robed youth changed. He took a deep breath, and his expression became tranquil. He then turned over his hand, and pulled out a white long sword from his back. It was diffusing an ice-cold chillness, and was resisting the fiery aura of the opponent. The red-robed girl raised her eyebrows, and exposed an astonished look in her eyes. Both of them shouted loudly at the same time. Then, their figures moved. Their moves were fast and nimble. Suddenly, several sword shadows appeared from the white long sword, and went towards the opponent to attack. Bang! 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 A series of striking sounds were transmitted from the sword with a flickering spark. Both of them maximized their momentum. The audience could only see series of white shadows and red shadows rolling with a very fast speed. The sword shadows appeared in the surroundings with cracking sparks from time to time. A series of metal clanking sounds could also be heard from time to time. Suddenly, a cold humming sound was transmitted. Then, the red shadow lights brightened up like the regiments of huge and vigorous flames. After that, 3 thick sword shadows came out from the flames. They went towards the white shadows to disperse them. A white silhouette went out flying like a ball with a blood-curdling screech. Then, the white shadow dissipated, and exposed the figure of the white-robed youth. There was a huge wound on his shoulder, blood was flowing out of his wound. White bones could faintly be seen inside the wound. The sword in his right hand hung softly to his side. His complexion looked ugly. The red shadows also dispersed, and exposed the red-robed girl. She had a pale expression on her face. If you still want to play, I'm with you, the red-robed girl laughed grimly and said. A red light shone like flames on the red sword in her hand. No need. Sister's strength is formidable. Your raging flame light diffraction sword art is of consummate level. So, I admit my defeat, the white-robed youth replied. 2 people of the 2nd grade had got defeated in a row. In fact, one of them ranked 2nd among the 2nd grade disciples. So, the other 2nd grade disciples had fell silent. No one dared to step forward to challenge anyone for a long while. According to the rules of the competition, if no one steps forward to challenge anyone, then it means that all the 2nd grade disciples have given up. So, let's move on to the next competition. The audience had become impatient by now. So, the grey-robed old man spoke as he looked towards Shi Mu. In fact, he had rested his glance on Shi Mu. Chapter 199, Graceful Blade Strike. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu moved his eyes since he felt something. 2 cold ons emitted from his eyes. Then, his vision moved and fell on the body of the red-robed woman Su Ling, who was standing in the extreme right under the black stone tablet. The red-robed woman sensed Shi Mu's eyes on her. A furious and shocked look appeared on her face. She tightened her grip on the sword hilt around her waist with a desire to step out. She then took half a step forward. But then, Shi Mu's vision moved towards Qiao Zhi's body. So, the red-robed woman kept her foot hanging in the air. She neither advanced nor withdrew it. Her complexion turned red and blue. But, she felt relaxed in her heart without knowing the reason. Qiao Zhi took a tight breath as he saw that Shi Mu was looking at him. Fortunately, Shi Mu's vision didn't stay on him for too long, and shifted past him. Shi Mu swept his vision neither too quickly nor too slowly from left to right. His vision had fallen on all the people in less than half of a breath's time. The reactions of the 1st grade disciples differed as his vision went over them. But, all of them felt as if they were prey who were being watched by a hunter. This half of a breath's time felt like a very long time to them. A few of them even had beads of sweat oozing from their foreheads. Suddenly, Shi Mu's vision fell on a silver-haired youth who was standing on the extreme left side. He then said, I'm Shi Mu, and I challenge Brother Mo Ning. Shi Mu's voice wasn't too loud, but his words caused an uproar in the crowd. Everyone issued shouts in surprise, and started to raise several questions. He challenged the first-ranked disciple of the 1st grade. This is too arrogant. The difference between the 1st grade and the 2nd grade disciples isn't less, well, this time it would be a good show to watch. A cold light flashed in Mo Ning's eyes. His face exposed an ice-cold killing intention. He then slowly walked into the ring without speaking a single word. Shi Mu carried his meteoric hammer in his left hand. He was also carrying his black blade on his back. He then walked into the ring. He didn't plan to use the blade. He had kept it in Bai Shi's room when he had challenged Duan Qianli. But then, he had requested Bai Shi to bring him the blade while he was resting. A white light flashed, and a layer of firm boundary shrouded the insides of the ring. You dared to challenge me? Well, I'm worried that you'll soon regret it. A light of fierce look flashed in Mo Ning's eyes as he spoke in a cold voice. Both of them had observed each other with the help of their eyesight before the match had started. Mo Ning had already made a plan to defeat Shi Mu. He was proud and arrogant, and he wanted Shi Mu to regret his decision. He was impatient to teach his opponent a lesson. Pull out the blade, Mo Ning said coldly. A blue light flashed in his hand, and a watery blue and long sword appeared in his hand. The blade of the blue sword was gleaming like the surface of water. Multiple waves were faintly circulating on its surface. It seemed to be a magic tool. Shi Mu moved his hand and drew out the black blade from his back as he heard this. But then, he rolled his wrist, and threw the black blade on the ground. Half of the blade pierced into the ground of the ring with a tut sound. I've pulled out. Shi Mu looked towards Mo Ning, and replied with an expressionless face. All the disciples outside the ring opened their eyes wide as they saw this. Then, they began to issue hoots of laughter. "You're courting death." Emoning was stumped for words, he became extremely furious. Then, his figure went out flying towards Shi Mu in a flash. Several blue rays were emitted from the long sword in his hand. Then, blue sword chi emerged on the sword in the manner in which a peacock spreads its tail. Then, the sword chi went stabbing towards Shi Mu. Shi Mu narrowed his eyes. These blue sword chi were certainly real. They came towards him while cutting the air and issuing a sky-splitting sound. It seemed that the sword had created a shadow owing to the real sword chi, not because of its quick speed. It's releasing real chi. Shi Mu's vision flickered as he groaned coldly. Then, he shook his arm, and lifted the meteoric hammer in his hand like a viper. It then turned into a black light, and darted out with an extremely quick speed. Emoning stopped moving. Then, his body fell backwards. A rumbling sound echoed. The meteoric hammer and the blue sword chi collided. Then, the 10 or more blue sword chi broke and split open. Shi Mu wrinkled his brows. The power of the meteoric hammer was enormous. But, he hadn't expected that the blue sword chi would be defeated so easily. Then, his complexion changed. The fragmented blue sword chi hadn't really dissipated. It had flashed and got transformed into a disk of white drizzling watery fog. It then started to attach and diffuse at a very fast speed. It transformed into a faint cloud and mist in the blink of an eye. Everything around them gradually became hazy and fuzzy. Emoning's figure disappeared into the cloud and mist around him. Even his traces faded away. The art of the concealed cloud sword. So, that's what it is, Shi Mu said in his heart. Whiz! The blue sword chi flew and darted out from his side. Then, a man's shadow flashed from the depth of the fog. Shi Mu's complexion became cold. He waved his arm, and the meteoric hammer got transformed into a black dragon. Then, the blue sword chi was rooted and dispersed easily. The speed of the meteoric hammer increased. It transformed into black lightning, and rushed forward while carrying a strong airflow from the surroundings. It rapidly hit the man's shadow. It ripped the shadow apart as the black light flashed and passed through it. Shi Mu's complexion sank because it hadn't hit the real man. He then waved his hand, and pulled the meteoric hammer back. The fragmented sword chi got transformed into white fog, and rapidly got diffused. The mist in the surroundings became denser. The ring had limited space. So, it quickly got filled with rolled-up fog, and the range of the field of vision rapidly decreased. Nothing could be seen beyond a few feet. Shi Mu's complexion sank. Bai Shi and the others looked worried as they saw this situation. He could release real qi. Emoning has already started to coagulate his qi. He seems to be just half a step away from entering into the Xian Tian realm, an elder of the Black Demon sect said with a smile. He was sitting on the platform beside the ring. This Shi Mu's strength is also not weak. His chances of success would have been good if he had challenged some other low-ranked person of the first grade. But, he chose Emoning. Another elder with a long beard shook his head and said, "Hee, perhaps this man has lost his mind because of his previous victory. He's extremely impudent. The art of the concealed cloud sword will slowly reveal its wonders after Emoning enters into the Xian Tian realm. Young disciples' actions will inflict a lot of hardships onto him." Shi Mu stood inside the ring with closed eyes and attentive ears. It seemed that he was trying to listen to the sounds of activity in his surroundings. Suddenly, a man's shadow appeared inside the fog. It was flying towards Shi Mu. Shi Mu opened his eyes, and golden ons flashed through his pupils. He then issued a loud sound from his mouth. The meteoric hammer in his hand went out hitting towards that man's shadow. The fog behind Shi Mu's back fluctuated. Then, an arm appeared, and a sword shot noiselessly towards Shi Mu's back. The air fluctuated, and an invisible sword chi shot out. But, it didn't issue any sound. The fight was seemingly going to end. Emoning's art of the concealed cloud sword was his trump card. He could easily defeat his opponent in a close combat owing to this art. However, who would have imagined that Shi Mu would bend the corner of his mouth at this moment? Suddenly, he turned around like lightning. He then moved his fist towards the sword. His fist was sparkling like jade. Suddenly, the air around them shook. Several round and clear ripples could be seen appearing from Shi Mu's fist. Kaka! Several bone-breaking sounds were heard. Suddenly, an arm was broken in the fog. It got twisted and deformed to an abnormal angle. The fist wind whistled while arousing a whirlpool in the air. It pushed aside the fog in the surroundings, and revealed the figure of Emoning inside it. Emoning was looking at his broken arm with a shocked face. His figure flashed, and moved back into the fog. "You want to run away?" Shi Mu sneered. He then waved his arm, and the meteoric hammer looking like a black meteor caught up with Emoning's figure in the blink of an eye. Then, a gigantic power violently surged up. Emoning's complexion changed. He then waved his intact arm, and the blue sword in his hand got transformed into sword shadows. He then kept it in the front of his body in order to block Shi Mu's blows. A rumbling sound was heard. The black meteor hammer got knocked against the blue sword shadows. It easily tore them apart. However, its speed didn't decrease. Then, it dashed to hit Emoning's chest. Emoning exposed an extremely frightened look on his face. This meteoric hammer had an astonishing power. This had become clear from this move. He shouted out loudly. Then, layers of white light appeared on his neck. It turned out to be a white jade necklace. The white light got condensed into a layer of light curtain. It defended his body from the front. The meteoric hammer ruthlessly whipped the light curtain, and the curtain broke down with a kaka sound. Emoning's two defense strategies had failed. The meteoric hammer's speed and might had also become slower. However, it severely hit Emoning in his chest. Bang! A stuffy sound echoed. Emoning's body was sent out flying like a piece of stone. It then got knocked against the sealed boundary around the ring. He then opened his mouth, and a mouthful of blood gushed out from it. A cold light flashed in Shi Mu's eyes. He kicked his foot on his black blade that was inserted into the ground. He poured his real chi from his foot, and attracted the blade with his toe. Whiz! A whooshing sound was heard. Suddenly, the black blade got transformed into a black light. It went out like a black dragon and pushed aside the clouds and the mist. It then went stabbing towards Emoning's left shoulder. The power of this graceful blade was extremely fierce. It would have destroyed the entire arm of Emoning if it had hit his shoulder. The meteoric hammer had hit Emoning's chest a short while ago. Now, he couldn't resist most of the attacks even though he was holding his real chi in his body. His internal organs got rolled up, and budged out from his body. His face had turned ashen. Then, a grey light appeared from his side, and hit the black blade. A loud clanging sound echoed. The direction of the black blade got deviated by the grey light. It slightly touched Emoning's shoulder, and stabbed the firm boundary around the ring. A buzzing sound was heard. The firm boundary swayed up violently. Rays of light flashed, and it almost collapsed. However, it still stood firm. The grey-robed old man's figure appeared. He had an embarrassed look on his face. It was he who had released the grey light. But, he had also underestimated the power of the black blade. It was almost impossible to save Emoning. Emoning is unable to continue the fight. So, you don't need to make any more moves now, the grey-robed old man said. Shi Mu raised the tip of his brow and nodded. The grey-robed old man took out a healing magic charm, and pasted it on Emoning's wound to stabilize the condition of his injury. He then waved his hand, and undid the boundary around the ring. He waved his sleeves, and a gale rose up out of nowhere. It made the fog in the ring disperse, and exposed the situation inside the ring. Shi Mu has won the challenge. He has now attained rank 1 among the first-grade disciples. The environment outside the ring flared up like boiling water as the grey-robed old man's voice resounded. The faces of most of the people were filled with incredible colors. The remaining 9 disciples of the first grade were dumbstruck. Emoning was the strongest among them. So, they hadn't expected that he would be defeated in this manner. They hadn't been able to witness the fight owing to the curled-up clouds and mist in the ring. Nothing was visible to anyone, except for a fuzzy shadow of a man. Emoning was clearly winning the fight a moment ago. He had trapped Shi Mu with his sword skills. It was highly unexpected that things would take a new turn in the blink of an eye. Now, Emoning had been defeated. But, Shi Mu had only used a limited numbers of his moves. The trick with the hammer and the blade was extremely neat and tidy. It wasn't sloppy at all. The head and the elders of the Black Demon sect had an astonished look across their faces. They had thought that Shi Mu was impudent. Now, their faces became red, and they remained speechless for a long while. Shi Mu had defeated the number 1 disciples among the second grade and the first grade disciples on the same day. This had never happened in the history of the Black Demon sect. Jin Xiaochai looked towards Shi Mu's extraordinary splendor with the pair of her wonderful eyes. Then, her vision flickered. It seemed as if she was thinking about something. Chapter 200, Vast Earth Ring. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Emoning felt traumatized ever since he had seen that the black blade wasn't too far away from his body. His back was drenched in cold sweat as a result. His arm would have been destroyed if the grey-robed old man hadn't interrupted Shi Mu in order to defend him. However, the fact was that Shi Mu wouldn't have hit his shoulder with the edge of his blade if he had genuinely intended to kill him. Emoning looked towards Shi Mu with resentment. He then struggled to get up. After that, he put his watery blue-colored sword back into its sheath. He jumped down from the ring, and started to walk towards a distant place. Shi Mu tied his meteoric hammer to his waist, and picked up the black blade from the ground. He then nodded towards the grey-robed old man, and walked down the ring. He casually walked over beneath the black stone tablet, and stood at Emoning's place. He then sat down cross-legged, and closed his eyes in order to take rest. Qian Xiang, Bai Shuixiu and the others turned their heads, and looked towards Shi Mu. Each one of them bore different expressions on their faces. The competition continues. Is there anyone else who wants to challenge any first-grade disciple? The grey-robed old man asked in a clear voice. The remaining top second-grade disciples looked at each other. Shi Mu had defeated Emoning in one fell swoop. It had made them feel extremely confident. So, 2 people came out, and raised challenges against the first-grade disciples. The challenged first-grade disciples put away their aloof and disdained expressions since they had learned a lot from Shi Mu's case. Their complexions became extremely dignified. The 2 second-grade disciples ended up getting seriously defeated. Both of them lost their consciousness. Then, they were carried down the ring. One of them had challenged the 3rd-ranked disciple who was a spirit-grade magician Bai Shuixiu. Almost all the bones of that 2nd-grade disciple had broken down under the attack of Bai Shuixiu's powerful methods. It had become certain that his cultivation would suffer a devastating decline even if his injuries were healed. Therefore, the confidence of the other 2nd-grade disciples was crushed in a flash. After that, nobody dared to raise a challenge against any 1st-grade disciple. The grey-robed old man declared the results of the competition. Then, mutual challenge took place among the 1st-grade disciples in order to determine their ranking. This round hadn't made any big difference in the rankings of the 1st-grade disciples before this year, even though there had been occasional fights. The 1st-grade disciples had had a mutual understanding between them until the competition of the previous year. They had never thought of challenging each other and suffer irreconcilable outcomes that could affect their subsequent practice just for the sake of a little difference in their ranks. After all, the 1st-grade disciples had the best possible resources of the sect at their disposal. Their only target was to reach the Xian realm or to become a star-ranked warlock, and rise to the higher levels in the sect. However, Shi Mu had become a 1st-grade disciple now. Moreover, the reward for the first-ranked disciple of the sect was rumored to be extremely precious. So, it was certain to cause some difference in the final ranking of the competition. Everyone near the ring became excited, and started to whisper among themselves. They looked under the black stone tablet. Most of them were looking towards Shi Mu. The strength that Shi Mu had displayed in the competition had been extremely valiant and overbearing against the expectations of all the people. The rest of the first-grade disciples seemed to be absent-minded. They had 2 or 3 matches among themselves. But, they made no further challenges. Shi Mu was resting with closed eyes. He didn't look towards anyone, it seemed as if he had forgotten about the competition. The competition finally came to an end after half an hour. Shi Mu and the other top 10 disciples stood inside the ring. They were facing the numerous disciples outside the ring. The head of the Black Demon sect was also standing inside the ring. He was looking at the top 10 first-grade disciples. There was a smiling expression on his face. He turned around to face the audience outside the ring and announced, "This round of the competition has ended. These 10 people standing in front of you are the top 10 first-grade disciples. They'll enjoy the best resources of the sect for their practice in the coming year. I also wish that everyone present here make efforts, concentrate on the training of the sect, and practice hard, so that you would also get a chance to stand here someday." The sect head's words were very powerful. They inspired the spirit of the disciples, and made them heat up with passion. It was evening time now. The afterglow of the setting sun was falling on the bodies of the top 10 first-grade disciples. It seemed as if a layer of golden cloth had covered their bodies. It made their figures look taller and more dignified. Several thousand people were looking at the 10 people standing inside the ring. Their eyes were filled with envy, so much so that many of them had clenched their fists tightly. The head of the Black Demon sect swept his vision towards the crowd. He exposed a satisfied expression on his face. The power of an example is sometimes more inspiring than 1,000 words. The head of the Black Demon sect waved his hand towards the crowd, and withdrew his vision. Then, a few black-robed disciples came with trays in their hands. There were pieces of red cloth in the trays. They climbed up inside the ring. Everyone's spirit rose as they saw this. According to the usual practice, the top 10 disciples in the competition would be given generous rewards. Some information had already been leaked out this time since this competition was quite unusual. It was a known fact that the first-ranked disciple would be given a precious reward. Everyone had already been looking forward to this since a long time. Shi Mu also exposed a curious look on his face. This was reason why there was so much publicity about this event. That secret treasure was part of the buzz about this competition. The head of the Black Demon sect arrived in front of Shi Mu, and made a gesture with his hand. Then, one of the black-robed disciples came over with his tray. The head of the Black Demon sect lifted the red cloth from the tray. A white ring was exposed under the cloth. Shi Mu's eyes shone. He then took a short breath. The white ring seemed to be an ordinary ring made up of white jade. Its shape was simple, and it was unadorned. It seemed to be quite ordinary. Not many people could find it extraordinary at the first glance. But, there was a layer of sparkling and translucent white light circulating on its surface. "This, is it the storage ring?" A Xiantian elder looked at the white ring. His face exposed an emotional expression. He then mumbled. It seemed that the other elders didn't know about the reward. They seemed to be shocked to see it. A lot of people exposed envious colors on their faces. The storage ring was made up of a special material, its refining was extremely difficult. Therefore, it was an extremely rare object. In fact, it was extremely hard for a Xiantian warrior to obtain one. But, the elders of the Black Demon sect had this storage ring. However, the number of such rings held by a single person never exceeded the number of one's fingers. Many people outside the ring had guessed the type of the ring. A few others didn't identify it at first. Then, they went into an uproar as they heard the discussions of the other people. This ring is known as the vast earth ring. The great elders of the sect have refined this storage magic tool with their own hands. You must put this thing to good use. The head of the Black Demon sect handed over the ring to Shi Mu. He then said with a serious expression on his face. It seemed to be intentional. The voice of the head of the Black Demon sect wasn't too loud. But, he had infused his real qi into his voice. So, it dispersed clearly and widely into the plaza. It left the crowd outside the ring, including the elders sitting on the viewing platform with dry mouths and tongues. Yes, Shi Mu replied and received it with both hands. He then put it in the middle finger of his right hand. Its size was perfect for his finger. His heart moved. His real qi got poured into the ring. But, the vast earth ring didn't show any reaction. This storage ring is different from other magic tools. You would need your blood to use it. Only Shi Mu could hear the voice of the head since he had spoken this sentence in a low voice. Shi Mu was startled. He then made a cut on his finger. After that, he smudged the ring with a drop of his blood. The blood got permeated, and went into the ring. Shi Mu raised his brows. The ring absorbed the essence of his blood. He immediately felt a kind of connection with it, as if it was a part of his body. His spirit power immediately reacted. Then, a cubic space appeared in the ring. It wasn't too large, but was as big as an ordinary room. Shi Mu felt exalted. But then, his complexion changed since the space inside the ring already contained something inside it. It was a small heap of black flame tokens. He swept his spirit power, and found that there were 100 of such tokens inside this space. These 100 black flame tokens are also a reward for the number 1 disciple in this competition. The head of the Black Demon sect knew about the tokens. So, he explained with a smile on his face. Many thanks to the sect head, Shi Mu said thankfully. The head of the Black Demon sect waved his hand, and proceeded to give rewards to the other disciples. All the rewards, the spirit stones, rare pills, and black flame tokens, were extremely precious. Everyone in the audience felt envious as they looked at these rewards. Moreover, they regretted that they weren't standing there in the ring. The head of the Black Demon sect spoke a few sentences after the distribution of rewards among the disciples. Then, he got down from the ring. The other elders also left one by one. Jin Xiaochai looked deeply towards Shi Mu. She then turned around, and went away. Shi Mu slowly walked down the ring. Several disciples outside the ring had an envious and a reverent expression on their faces at the same time. They stepped aside, and made passage for him. Shi Mu walked towards the shadows of 4 disciples among the crowd. The person in the front was Bai Shi, Xiaoming, Lanfeng, and Huo Mao were behind him. Brother Shi Mu, congratulations on being promoted to a senior disciple in the Black Demon sect. Bai Shi stepped forward and cupped his hands in greeting. He then said with a smile. Congratulations, senior brother. Xiaoming and others also stepped forward and cupped their hands in greeting. They then said in a respectful tone. No need to be so polite. We know each other from before. So, just call me Shi Mu like you used to. Shi Mu waved his hand, and replied with a smile. After that, the 5 of them started to walk away. Bai Shi and the others let Shi Mu precede, and followed after him. Most of the disciples in the plaza were looking at them. Their eyes were filled with curiosity, jealousy, envy, and reverence. Shi Mu calmly walked through the stream of people. He soon moved away from the area. Suddenly, he spotted a familiar figure in the crowd with his extraordinary vision. He stopped walking. He then turned his head to look at the person. Bai Shi and the other people behind him also stopped as they saw this. They then followed his gaze. The man Shi Mu was looking at was a tall and thin youth. He was wearing the clothes of the second-grade disciples. His cultivation had reached the Houtian advanced stage. He had lowered his head, and had mingled with the crowd. He saw that Shi Mu was looking at him. But, he kept on standing straight. Then, he calmly looked towards Shi Mu. He was the second-grade disciple who had tried to snatch away Shi Mu's black blade back in those days. His name was Zhou Yan. Shi Mu's heart moved. He took a big step towards Zhou Yan, and stopped 10 steps away from him. Several disciples around Zhou Yan felt that there was something wrong. They immediately dispersed in confusion. But, they didn't walk too far away, they stopped nearby. Many of them had been bullied by Zhou Yan, and many of them had heard about his bad reputation. People around him whispered into each other's ears while taking joy in his misfortune. Zhou Yan stood alone on the spot. He sensed the formidable aura around Shi Mu, and closed his eyes. Traces of panic and uncertainty flashed through his eyes. "Don't you like this blade? Catch it, it's yours," Shi Mu said, and threw his black blade along with its sheath towards Zhou Yan. Zhou Yan stared at him blankly. He stretched out his hands subconsciously, and caught the black blade. A power far beyond his imagination passed through the blade, and smothered his chest. His qi and blood started to churn up in his body. His hands were knocked back at the same time. Dang! 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 Zhou Yan retreated 5 or 6 steps backwards. Then, he fell on the ground on his back. All the disciples around him burst out into laughter. Some people even shouted out loudly.